Good evening, everyone. I have two councillors available online. If I can just, if I can maybe ask members of council to turn on your video and other members attending just to turn off your video, and that allows me to percolate the staff up to the top of the live stream and see them in the meeting. Bring them up here on my screen as well. And as we call the meeting to order, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered here and of course some remotely in the traditional territories of the Coast and the Straits Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen speaking people known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. Before I go into the procedural pieces of this, of approval of agenda, I'm just going to ask if I can get the two councillors that are attending remotely to join, to turn on their video so I can see them and see the hands go up and down. That would be very much appreciated. And I'll just pull it up here on my screen as well so I have it. I don't have to crane my head around to the, to see the screens up above.
Testing, testing.
There you are, Councillor Zelka, welcome. And Councillor Ney, are you joined us yet?
Thank you.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. If you, ultimately, if you can put your screens on, that's helpful just to manage the meeting, but I will move forward with the agenda. We have the approval of the agenda up next. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
All those in favor?
That's me trying to turn up my local screen. We're all good here now. Passes. Thank you very much. And we have adoption of the minutes of October the 12th, regular council meeting. Moved, seconded. Is there any changes, corrections on those minutes? Don't see any hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. The first item of business is business arising from the minutes. And we just have an item here, something we dealt with at the last meeting, but procedurally, I believe we didn't feel, staff felt we didn't give adequate notice in writing to the applicant, so we're just bringing it here procedurally to clean it up, to bring it, to reconsider it, and then we'll do the official notification and have it come back again to give the applicant sufficient time to come to this table. So that's the recommendation here. Ms. Williams, anything else to add to that piece? It's a bit of a cumbersome procedural piece here, but staff felt it was fairly important to do it to make sure we always follow the same process on these applications. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you to the rest of council, anytime that a member of the public appeals a decision of staff and would like council to reconsider a decision, it's paramount that they have an opportunity to be heard. And what we heard at the last meeting on October the 12th was that staff had reached out on numerous occasions, including a drive-by to the house, but we were not able to make contact with the owners. So we did leave the last meeting with a sense of discomfort that they had not been given that fair opportunity. And so that's why this memo is before you, to ask that council rescind that resolution and give staff an opportunity to ensure that they have that opportunity to be heard.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Are there any questions of staff on that? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I think that I recall that the outreach to the property owner originally was by phone and in person. I guess what is proposed in terms of ensuring that the property owner is contacted this time? It seems like they've been tough to reach, so I'm just kind of wondering what's the strategy to ensure that they are definitively contacted.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. And in response to Councillor Appleton's question, staff would endeavor to ensure that the property owner is contacted in writing, and that would either be through a delivered notice through a bylaw enforcement officer or registered mail.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
I'm just wondering if you would like this read out in its entirety, or can we just move
I
through?
think we can just move all three
Okay.
portions of that together. It's a procedural piece more than a...
Okay, so I will make the staff recommendation to be received, rescinded, and notification.
Great, thank you very much. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that item? Don't see any. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Williams. I think it's incumbent upon us to always follow the same process and be consistent on that, and I appreciate staff flagging it, and although this is a bit cumbersome, always worthwhile to do it right. Up next is Mayor's remarks, and I have very brief remarks. Just want to let people know that the feedback on the budget survey is now complete, and we will be getting those results as part of our strategic planning process in November. And want to wish everybody a happy Halloween as we come close to that occasion. It's going to be another strange one, I know. But also just want to thank and acknowledge the fact that we're in another period of transition as we pass in this pandemic from in sort of a weird mix of restrictions and openness, and we're all trying to find a way through as to what's the appropriate wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, large gatherings, not large gatherings, vaccinated, not vaccinated. I just really appreciate everybody in the community at large just remaining kind and thoughtful and understanding that sometimes people have their own situations and conditions that make them make decisions or have constraints that affect them. So if you see someone who seems overly cautious or underly cautious, treat them with kindness, treat them with respect. I always think back to Bonnie Henry's words. So just very appreciative. I've seen a lot of that in our community, and I just want to encourage that behavior to continue as it's really important as we go through these times, particularly times of transition like we're in right now. With that, we're moving on to presentations. We have Mr. Thomas, Wiley Thomas, who's here to give a presentation on the uplands. Mr. Thomas, we have allocated about 5 minutes of presentation and 5 minutes of questions. We'll try and stick as close to that as possible, but understand sometimes it's hard to keep exactly to that timeline. So I think you're online. I thought I saw you briefly on the screen.
I am.
Great.
Yes, hi.
So am I having Mr. Hidley introduce this, or am I going straight to Mr. Thomas? Ms. Williams?
My apologies, Your Worship. I think we can go straight to Mr. Thomas.
Excellent. Welcome, Mr. Thomas. It's nice to see you again, however virtually.
Thank you very much. Do you need to see me on video as well? Can you see me on video?
We don't need you on video, no. If
Okay.
it's just we just see it in the screen here, so it's fine to hear your voice.
Okay. Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of Council, for inviting me to present again. I was actually told that I had 20 minutes, and I wrote the presentation along those lines. Will that present a problem? Because there is quite a bit of material.
If you could keep it as short as possible, we have a very large agenda package ahead of us. Normally, delegations are 10 minutes tops, but so yeah, if you can keep it to the highlights, we do always appreciate this. Is a good news story for the whole community, and I really appreciate all the work that's going on. So I don't want to cut you short, but I also want to be respectful of all the other work we have to do. So thank you.
Okay, so I'll just see if I'm going to share my screen. Did that work?
It
Can you see
did.
my
We can see it now. You just put it into presentation mode.
And then play from start. Okay. So my presentation tonight is on stewardship of natural areas in Oak Bay, and to give you an update on the federal funded projects that we have ongoing in the municipality. This was the outline. Just go over very quickly what makes Oak Bay such an incredibly special place from a natural heritage point of view. Give some highlights of the stewardship activities underway in the municipality. And as you know, most of this is volunteer driven. An update on federally supported projects. So in the past, as you know, we've been receiving money through the Habitat Stewardship Program. But this year we were awarded additional funding through a new program called the Priority Places Program. And then I'd like to review some of the successes and challenges. And I did have some slides from FOOP from last year because when I was set to present in March 2020, but that got canceled because of COVID, but I think I will drop those from the presentation. So very quickly, Oak Bay has 49 hectares of natural areas that are either parks or parkettes. And a big proportion of these are Garry Oak and associated ecosystems. So this is a plant community that has been declared globally critically imperiled, meaning that if we don't take action now, we could lose these plant communities forever. on a global scale. And in our region, we have less than 1% remaining. So this is an example. This is, taken from the Central Meadow in Uplands Park. This is what is globally critically imperiled. So these flower meadows, these iconic camas meadows. And you've seen this map before, but it shows the shrinkage of the extent of Garry Oak ecosystems in our region. So the green was in the past and the red is what remains. So in addition to having the endangered ecological communities, we have also a large number of endangered species, and it actually really puts us on the map in terms of natural history. Anybody who does anything in conservation knows about Uplands Park and a couple of other hotspots in our region, but definitely Oak Bay is up there. So we have 25 endangered species, and they're found in, they're probably found all over, but we know of them in a number of Oak Bay parks, namely Uplands Park and Cattle Point, which has 20. Harling Point and the Chinese Cemetery has 5, Mary Todd Island 3, Gonzales Point 3, and so on. So you'll notice that some of those are in italics. That is because they are not technically Oak Bay parks, they're private land. And maybe I won't discuss all of these, but these are just some of the plants that we have in the park. If you look at the top left, the Victoria's owl clover, that plant is pretty much endemic to Oak Bay. It's found in Cattle Point and about 4 other places in the world. So we have a part of that. And then the plant right underneath it, also at Cattle Point, is called bearded owl clover. And there is a researcher in Washington State who's looking at it very carefully, closely, and believes it may actually be an undescribed species. And if that is the case, then it is pretty much endemic to our region and is extremely rare. So we're very lucky in Oak Bay to have so many volunteers actively involved in a bunch of things, but particularly in restoration. So this is just a list of some of the restoration projects we have going, all volunteer driven. And the ones with asterisks are the ones that have received external funding. The rest are entirely volunteer driven. And as you know, the coming decade, the current decade, has been declared by the UN as the decade of ecosystem restoration. And Oak Bay signed on to this, and we expect that this will inspire more restoration as the decade progresses. So in terms of federally supported projects, we have 2 ongoing right now. HSP, which you're familiar with, has been around since 2016. It's managed by the Environment Canada under the Species at Risk Act. And then this year, for the first time, we received funding through a new program called Priority Places. So the HSP project has been focused entirely on Uplands Park and Cattle Point. And the work has really involved, removal of invasive species. You've probably seen the trucks and the volunteers pulling out ivy and things like that. We plant a native species. We have a very strong education outreach program that's managed by Margaret Lidkey, and we've also put in a bunch of hardscaping. It's dependent on matching contributions, and this is provided by Oak Bay and by the community, namely Friends of Uplands Park. And we're currently in the 3rd year or final year of a 3-year funding program. So it's been great, the HSP funding, because it's helped pay for our implementation of our invasive plant management plan. So each year in that plan has a detailed work plan, and we use funding from HSP to pay for that, implementing those action plans. So I'm just going to skip this. Just as a slide to show you that the level of investment in the park. So this is, I went back to 2014 and added up the contributions from different sources. So in all, we've had 938,000 in cash and in-kind contributions to the park in 2014. I can say that's definitely an underestimate because we miss things when we're recording them. 247,000 from the Government of Canada, more than 300,000 from Oak Bay, and 390,000 from the community and Friends of Uplands Park. So the Priority Places program, as I said, was a new program this year, and it allows allowed us to hire a crew of young people to help remove invasive plants, and this is the crew at Mary Todd. And the money allowed us to expand our work to other parks in the municipality. So Mary Todd, Trafalgar Park, and Harling Point, those are places that hadn't received funding in the past. And it also helped fund extra work at Uplands Park. So I'll just go through Mary Todd quickly. So at Mary Todd, the crew spent about 3 weeks removing broom, etc., and they managed to clear the island completely of broom. They cleared all the ivy off the island and almost all of the daphne. So I think this is the first time that park had been cleared of these weeds. And we had a lot of volunteers contribute to getting the project done. So here we have a picture of Matt Fairbarns, who very kindly ferried us from the marina to the island several times a day, starting at 6 a.m. And then this is a week's worth of biomass removed from the island. And then we also had help from Oak Bay Search and Rescue, who came and pulled bags off the island, and Oak Bay Parks disposed of it at the other end. So Trafalgar Park, I'm sure you are all know Margaret and Matt Fairbarns, who have been working there since 2017 with Margaret Jenkins Schools, working twice weekly, and they focused on gorse, broom, blackberry, and ivy. And so it's quite incredible, these little kids. If you've been to the park in the past, it was covered with 8-foot tall gorse plants, and these kids removed, basically transformed the entire landscape, removed all the broom. So here you can see them removing the broom. Here's some of the broom that they removed, all by little kids. And Margaret would go there on the weekends with her grandkids to water some of the shrubs that had been planted earlier. Trafalgar Park, the Priority Places crew, so we use a Priority Places crew at Trafalgar Park to work in areas where the kids couldn't work. So basically the areas that were dangerous, and also to retreat with herbicide regrowth of things like blackberry. So that was the smoke storm that we had, the fire. And here you can see the crew working on the cliff's edge, removing gorse that obviously kids can't get at. It's a crew, happy crew with the gorse. And then in Uplands Park, the Priority Places crew focused on implementing the work plans for 2024 and 2025 from our invasive plant management plan. So that was really great that we've got a head start on that process. So we'll hopefully be even further ahead than we normally would have been. So they also worked on restoring a meadow that had been choked out by Himalayan blackberry. So that used to be a wet meadow, and it had a large number of extremely rare plants, and it was completely consumed by Himalayan blackberry and a lot of sycamore maples and one-seed hawthorn. And you've probably seen it if you walk along Dorset. You'll see a big meadow that's been cleared. So I'll just zoom in here. So this is the central meadow you see in red, 17. And those striped areas around it are where we've been focusing our shrub removal. So we can't remove shrubs from the entire park, so we focus on the areas of highest return. And so that's around those meadows that have the highest number of rare species. And so that yellow double hatched area there on the northwest, that was all ivy, and the crew worked there. And then they also removed along Dorset there on the left-hand side of the picture of the map is where they removed young invasive trees and Himalayan blackberry. So here's some pictures of the crew moving Himalayan blackberry, some of the trees. So they focused on small trees that they could remove with hand saws. And then we had arborists come and remove the bigger trees. So here they are standing on top of a patch of blackberry that they cleared out, and then those trees you see in the background, they're all gone now. Those are sycamore maples, and they've all been taken out. So some of the successes and challenge, I'll go over this quickly because I'd like to get to the sort of recommendations or ideas. So we've been very good, I think, at increasing appreciation among park goers of the natural values of the park. So the people the regulars all know about the park and are all very respectful. We've seen an increase in populations for the rare species that we're protecting. So that's, that's a success. And we've also seen an increase in biodiversity, and this is more anecdotal. We've managed to close off the central meadow where the 17 endangered species are during the wet months, and this has helped protect those meadows from excessive trampling during the wet months. And we've installed exclosures at Cattle Point and other places, and invasive species are really coming under control. So as an example, here we have in 2014, so Scotch broom and gorse are the worst biggest enemies of the open meadows. And so in 2014, we took 404 hours to clear the broom, and in 2020, it took us 31 hours. So you can see there's progress. Some of the challenges are as follows. Since COVID, there's been an increase in recreational use and visitors to the park. For a while, we were the only park in the region that was open. And so a lot of people sort of flocked to the park and discovered it or rediscovered it. And I think we may find that they're here to stay. It is a beautiful park, and there's not much else to take your dog to. And a lot of the local dog parks, like, for example, UVic used the opportunity to close down its dog park permanently. COVID, they just closed it, and now that's gone. So there's increased pressures on those meadow systems. We have a lot of, we have a lot of wet areas of the park, and they're difficult to navigate in the winter. And these need to be addressed because they force people, who are trying to avoid getting their feet wet into sensitive habitat, like to cross meadows and things like that. How am I doing for time?
You're over the 10 minutes, but you're very interesting. So we'll give you can manage your time appropriately.
Okay, though, because I was told 20 minutes, so I did this for 20 minutes, and I was glad for it because there's quite a bit in here, but that's good. We skipped over some of the unnecessary stuff, I guess, what I realized. Okay, so outreach and messaging. Margaret and Friends of Uplands Park spent a lot of time, doing outreach, public outreach programming, and messages, newspaper articles, talking to people. The regulars to the park understand what's so great about the park and what's at stake. And now we have a whole new group that we have to get this message to. So I'll describe this in a minute, but there are a lot of newcomers to the park, and a lot of them don't feel that they see those open meadows as grassy fields. And finally, I think it's something that we have to think about as a municipality. Margaret has provided the municipality with, she's worked for free during her retirement. She loves it. So it's not work for her. She loves it. But when she finally decides to retire from her retirement, she's going to leave a big hole. And I don't know if there's anyone around who can fill it. So that's something to think about because, and it's not just Margaret, it's also, Christina Johnson-Dean, and there's many others as well. So I included this picture because this illustrates the problem very well. This is the meadow that you come upon when you come in through the Dorset-Lincoln entrance to the park. And it is one of those critically imperiled flower meadows, Gary Oak meadows. And right now, as you can see, it looks like a grassy field. Old timers, regulars who come to the park never walk through it because they know what it looks like in the spring. And that sign there that the Parks Department put up, which says fragile wildflower meadows, please stay on trails and keep dogs out of meadows, is quite often not read. And so the newcomers are going into the center of that meadow, and they stand around in groups and they throw frisbees and things for their dogs. Now, 1 or 2 people is not a problem. What happens is, though, it invites more people to join. And so what we've been doing is going up to the individuals and saying, hey, we realize this looks like a grassy field, but did you know it's, an extremely endangered flower meadow? And they said, oh, no. And there's a sign there, and, they might have missed it. But once they hear what it is, they happily oblige and move on. But there are certain individuals who steadfastly just say, nope, this is a grassy field. I don't see any flowers. Nobody says I can't, etc. So this is one of the things that we're dealing with sort of really as a result of COVID. And if we're not careful, like I said, 1 or 2 people is not going to do it. But here's a situation down in the city of Victoria. On the left, you've seen this before, in 1957, flower meadows endangered, in 2004, gone. And it's not because somebody came out and deliberately destroyed it, it's just, it's been overused and at the wrong times of the year. And then this is just to show you the increase in numbers. So this is Cattle Point during the week. And I mean, huge numbers of people. Never seen it like that. And then, using the meadows to do all sorts of things. So here's a couple of my recommendations. I guess Margaret's had her say in it as well. There's a need to have areas for dogs to run off leash. There have been a few that have been taken away, and with the closing of Willows Beach to dogs off leash, there's increased pressure on Uplands Park. And you can't really blame people. They want a place to walk their dog. So we have to figure out, and I don't know if it's what the answer is because I don't know where you would put it. There is a spot there is a spot in Uplands Park that might make a good off leash dog park, but it might be too wet. I don't know. I'll show you the next slide. We need to improve the trail system and signage. So we need to build up trails that flood in the winter so that people aren't forced into the meadows. And in some places where it makes sense, we need to install rope and post fencing because sometimes it's just impossible to keep people out otherwise. And another idea is to have a parks ambassadors program. And I believe Margaret has written to the municipality about it. It would be volunteer run, but managed by the municipality. And it would consist of usually retired people wandering the park, just talking to people, telling them about the park and what to do and what not to do. And a lot of this is in the management plan for the park that council adopted in 2019. So here's a map, shows you the proposed areas, those green stripes. They might be appropriate for a dog park. And then this is just to show you the flooding of the trail. So this is zoomed in on the central meadow. And the red areas are areas that become flooded. I mean, there's standing water in those areas. And sometimes, in some places, it's as high as your knee. And the yellow are muddy. And when I say muddy, I'm talking really muddy. And I'll show you some pictures of that. And the green is sort of more or less passable. And then you see the central meadow. And the central meadow has been blocked off by those, you can see those bars so that people don't walk through the meadow anymore. So they're forced around and then they get into these really wet areas and they can't get through them. And so they veer off trail, which is what we don't want. So this is what a red trail looks like. So that's what I mean by standing water. And this is a yellow trail. So the park is very wet and muddy in the winter. And this is rope and post we put up around a patch of endangered species that had been used as a dog park. What happened was the central meadow was closed, so people came here and were throwing dogs and throwing balls for the dogs. And actually, as a result, the population of that plant plummeted. And then this is split rail fencing. That's, the budget for 2021 included money to purchase fencing for Cattle Point. And this is kind of what it would look like. It would be, low and, would fit into the landscape. It would be just a suggestion for people to come out. It's not like a barrier. And there would be parts of it that would open up so that certain times of the year would be open up and then it would be closed. So it wouldn't close it off forever. But we use the building of this, when we applied for the priority places funding, we had to give them, what are our in-kind contributions going to be? And this was one of them, the fencing. And so I I think I'll just leave it at this. This was from a few years ago. Just some pictures of Margaret, some of the events, like just to show, to, toot her horn, because I really think she does an amazing thing for us. 183 events. I mean, she just go, go, go. And, the volunteer contributions were substantial, worth about 78,000 to 79,000 in 2019, and 2020 is similar. And it's not just Margaret, but Margaret's, leading it. And, she organized an army of kids, 580 kids, I think it was, over a course of 2 weeks to plant in the park. And actually the parents were the ones that were more difficult to sort of herd. And then, some of the educational events, Cattle Point Rocks. Cattle Point has got interesting geological features. So, we had somebody from BC Geological Survey come and give a talk. Similar thing for children to learn about tidal pools. So, this is stuff that Margaret does and other members of Friends of Uplands Park, but, Margaret's go, go, go. And then that's the end of my presentation, and that is a beautiful spider web from Uplands Park. So I think I kind of covered the main points of it. I hope it wasn't too fast.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. We were actually just slightly over 20 minutes, so I think the original estimate was pretty much bang on, despite going fast. So thank you for that. I'm sure we have a couple of questions from council, and there's no directions to be done here today. It's really just for information for the public, but very much really appreciate you joining us today for this. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, and then Green.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Mr. Thomas, for yet again a wonderful presentation. I always look forward to your presentations and learning more about the park. And you're right, it is a gem, and I know that it has been utilized a lot more, especially since COVID. It's at the end of my street, and there's people coming and going from there all the time. I was interested in some of your suggestions in regards to designating an area for dogs off leash and improving this trail system and signage and rope and post fencing. Do you have any idea, budget-wise, what the improving the trail system and signage and rope and post fencing might entail?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't have a good idea because I haven't costed it out, but we could do that quite easy. We did do it for the central meadow for the post, so that information is there, and I can't remember off the top of my head what that was. The more challenging bit is, and it won't be that expensive either. And Friends of Uplands Park bought a lot of the rope, so the Parks Department has, I don't know how many thousands of feet of rope. So it's just a matter of purchasing the posts. But the thing that's probably the most difficult will be to do something about making those trails more passable during the winter months. So, there's one spot in particular that's probably going to require some building up of a berm or something. And I have no idea what that, I imagine would be more expensive. And then the mayor described, and I thought it was a great idea to put in sort of removable, I guess they were raised boardwalks that we could place down in some of the areas. Unfortunately, we can't really put down things like chips because they would just float away. In most places, they would just float away. And in some places, we would not want them in the meadow ecosystem because they would change a whole bunch of things that would probably do more harm than good. So the short answer is I don't really know, but we could figure that out. But the part I couldn't figure out on my own, and I'm sure Chris can help me and other people in the department, is the cost of doing something about those really, really wet areas that go around the central meadow, the ones that I showed you in that. I'll just go back to here. So these ones there, these red areas, you can see, I mean, they're flowing water.
Okay, thank you. And then, because I know like the split rail fencing, I know when we did that at Cattle Point a number of years ago, it was quite expensive to do the split rail fencing. That's another beast, I think. And then I really found your idea about the Park Ambassadors program really interesting, and I think that that's something that as far as for me, I would love to see something like that be implemented into the park. I know that during COVID we had some staff from the Parks, Rec and Culture Department down at Willows Beach talking to people and helping people. So that was one program similar, except this was paid, that they were paid staff. And if this could be a volunteer program with perhaps a little bit of augmentation from council, I think that would be a real asset for the park. So I would love to have us explore that a little bit more.
Thank you. We'll take it as a comment, not a question. And go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wiley. No, it's Mr. Thomas, sorry. Thank you very much for your report. Really, really interesting. And I just wondered if I could take you back to your reference to what the monetary contributions of volunteers represent in dollars. Would you just refresh our memory? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Mr. Thomas. I know you're flicking back to that screen.
Yeah, I'm just going to find it here. So
It had 390,000. Was that cash
This one
and
here.
time?
Oh, there we are. Yeah.
yeah, that the one?
Yes, thank you very much.
So the 246,789, that is actual cash that's been provided by the government, federal government. The 3,100, that is based on the application reports for the HSP program of Oak Bay's in-kind contribution. So that's arborist time, Chris Heidelay's time, disposal of, the weeds, etc. And then for the community, starting in about 2016, Margaret and I started a system of really keeping track of the hours, number of volunteers, how many hours they worked, where they worked, etc. And we based that on, for every hour of volunteer time, that was $10. So it's worth $10 of labor. So that's what that's based on. So it's basically, most of it's labor. And it depends. So as a botanist, I give some free botanical advice. So that's a little bit higher amount. And there are Government of Canada, when we do the applications, they have set rates for these things. And so that's what we've used. So we've taken all the hours and multiplied them by the hourly rate.
Thank you. I really appreciate your doing that. I think we often don't think about the value of volunteers in something like this, and I really appreciate you breaking it down like this in monetary terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
You're most
Councillor Green. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Thomas, for the presentation, and certainly for all of the work that you contribute to the community. I know some of it is funded, but I know that you also put in a lot of volunteer hours of just your passion for what the work involves. I'm wondering if you could, you spoke about the rarity of the ecological system and the endangered species that are throughout the district. I'm wondering if you could relay to us, we're learning that in Oak Bay, but I'm sure there's a broader community throughout Canada or even globally that are interested in this type of information. Do you have any information on that you could share with us?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Thomas?
So you're looking for groups that collect this kind of information?
Yeah, or just
Specifically,
even the information that goes out from yourself and other people that participate in this.
Mr. Thomas, are you able to answer the question? It's not.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. So I'm not sure what the question is. There are many groups involved in this field. There are some who are specific to Garry Oak ecosystems. And there's a global group called, now the name escapes me, but they're the ones that rank species globally. And so a lot of that information comes from them. There's also a BC government database and program that collects information on this. So a lot of my information, when I go to find out, how rare something is, I go to the Conservation Data Center, and they have a huge database there, and they're constantly evaluating and reevaluating the rarity of species and where they're found. Does that answer your question? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yes, it does, and I guess I'm always reminded that the folks who are out doing the bird watching, and I know that as soon as they see a species, they're tending to put it out over social media and notifying people, and there's a lot of people that are interested. So I'm
Yes.
wondering about botanists perhaps around the globe, or people that are interested in plant species that get messaging out of anything that you're finding in the rare ecosystems here.
Thank
So
you.
a really good tool is iNaturalist, and it's particularly good for plants. So if you see a plant that you don't know the identity of, you can take a picture and load it up, and it will give you suggestions, and then you load that up, and then there's a community of botanists who look at it and say, yep, that's right, or nope, that's wrong. And there's a process whereby it kind of goes up depending on how many people agree that that is the correct species. And then it gets georeference. So for example, if you wanted to find where a certain plant is, there's this whole community of, what do they call them? Citizen scientists who upload pictures of plants, and it's incredible as a resource what has been discovered that way.
Great, thank you very much.
There's that. Yeah.
iNaturalist, good to know.
iNaturalist, yeah.
Anything else, Councillor Patterson? Thank you. I have Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to our guest. Just to thank Mr. Thomas for his presentation, and as others have said, always very informative. I just would make the comment, notwithstanding all of the other great information you've provided, I do appreciate the specific mention of the impacts of dogs and the exigency to get additional facilities for dogs in the district. I think that we are all well apprised as to sort of the sensitivity of Uplands Park. And I think recent discussions in the community have definitely led council to sort of the awareness of with the closure of the UVic Dog Park, the need for those facilities. So I do appreciate your bringing your expertise to bear on that and just making comment on that, because I think it gives us that additional bit of information that we need to drive that decision. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I don't see any other hands, so I just have one quick question, Mr. Thomas, and that is, one of the pressures we see in that park is, of course, there is a lot of brush, a lot of snowberry and other brushes that are in there that are concentrating the foot traffic onto those trails and into smaller and smaller spaces. Is there any opportunities for us to invest to clear out some of the brush to open up more of that into proper meadowland?
I think so, yeah. I mean, you'd have to look at it in terms of suitability, but for sure. A lot of that area would have been opened in the past through regular fires. So, the snowberry actually is, in a way, it's native, but it's invasive. However, if you were to cut it down in some places, if you don't properly check it out, you may just end up with another wet area. So you'd have to find, I think it's definitely worth looking into.
Okay, thank you very much. I have Councillor Zelka, and then I think we probably are going to be moving on. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. Excellent presentation and fantastic work. I love going for a walk through that park. I'm very intrigued with the ambassador program that you recommended. I mean, if we're going to be clearing the land, obviously it would make sense to help with not only education but also a bit of guidance in this very delicate part of Oak Bay. I guess a question, through the chair, maybe the staff. If we were to set up some sort of ambassadors program, could this be done? Maybe in the parks, the committee that's potentially being set up as a result of an item on the agenda later on this meeting, in the Committee and Commission Policy Review. I think it's called the Committee for Parks, Rec and Culture. Is that something that we would have to do in there, or would that have to be a special process we'd have to go through, not unlike the volunteers that are used for the archives, for example?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I think it's really up to us if we want to implement that, how it would come through, but probably typically through Parks, Rec and Culture, either through staff or through a body associated with that would be logical. But Ms. Rella, anything you want to add?
It could be a future council governance decision.
Thank you. Councillor
Great.
Zelka?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see any other hands, so I'm ready.
I'll move receipt.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Can we get a copy of this presentation to include with it online, just so that people have it? It's not in our agenda package, so it'd be helpful just for the public to be able to see the slides as well.
I will
So
get
with that,
to Daniela.
very good. And Mr. Thomas, thank you so much for coming tonight and for trying to be speedy in the process of presenting such a large amount of information. And as I think all of council stated, we cannot express enough to you, to Margaret Lidke, and to all the volunteers who give their time to help protect these very valuable natural spaces. And to all the school children, for instance, who show up and do the hard work. I have many tales from my own children going and doing that work. So it's a real community builder and nature protector. And I don't think we can express enough the value that it brings to the community. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you very much for your support, and also to the Parks Department for being such a great support as well.
Yes, thank you. Good point. We do want to always recognize Chris Hidley and his whole team there for all that they do. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Okay, so I should sign off now?
You may. I think
Okay.
we have a motion to receive. I don't think I've called the question, though. So all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 7, we have a presentation by Mr. Weber, our planning technician, to speak to 713 St. Patrick Street. I believe Mr. Weber's here to give an overview, and I believe we also have the applicants available to answer questions as well. So with that, if I may just welcome Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The District for Oak Bay is in receipt of a development permit and development variance permit application to construct a new mixed-use commercial and multifamily residential building with variances on the property located at 713 St. Patrick Street. Staff have reviewed the proposal in context with relevant official community plan policies and guidelines, as well as the overall site design, and consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. And for additional clarification, as there are variance requests associated with this application, staff are requesting that at this point in the review process, council direct staff to issue public notification of the variance requests in accordance with the Land Use Procedures and Fees bylaw, so that council can review any public feedback submitted regarding the application prior to considering both the development permit and development variance permits for approval at a future meeting date. And getting into the details of the proposal, the subject property is located on the northeast corner of the intersection of St. Patrick Street and Central Avenue. It is approximately 516 meters squared in area and has a C2 commercial use zoning designation and corner commercial OCP designation. The existing one-story commercial building on the property was originally built in 1935 and currently houses the Casey's Market corner store. The applicant is proposing to demolish this building and construct a new 3-story mixed-use commercial and multifamily residential building with approximately 118 meters squared of ground floor commercial space and a total of 6 1- and 2-bedroom rental apartment units divided between the second and third stories, with unit sizes ranging from approximately 56 to 89 meters squared. 4 on-site vehicle parking spaces are proposed to be provided at the rear of the property, including 3 standard-sized vehicle parking stalls and 1 small vehicle parking stall. A total of 4 variances are being requested as part of the proposal, including requests to relax the maximum building height regulation within the zoning bylaw from 7.32 meters to 10.79 meters, and the maximum occupiable height regulation within the zoning bylaw from 4.60 meters to 7.47 meters, and the maximum number of stories regulation with the zoning bylaw from 2 to 3, and the minimum number of on-site vehicle parking spaces from 21 down to 4. 2 on-site bylaw protected trees are proposed to be removed as part of the proposal, which I should note that our municipal arborist noted to be invasive tree species. And the tree protection measures are to be in place to protect an existing off-site red oak tree located on the municipal boulevard in front of the property. 3 new trees are proposed to be planted on site, resulting in an estimated canopy coverage of 33%, exceeding the required canopy coverage target for the zone. The application was reviewed at the September 1st, 2020 Advisor Design Panel meeting, and the panel confirmed that living spaces will not be compromised by the reduced ceiling heights, They thought that the design was consistent with the architecture of the neighborhood and that it was a sensible and supportable design, that the requests are well-founded and successful, and that the awnings were used well to shrink the upper 2 stories, and the building is a successful improvement to the neighborhood, will be amenity to provide diverse experiences. They additionally questioned the applicant's stated reduction requirement in parking spaces from 21 to 10, and were concerned that the parking will be inadequate, and stated that the parking component is an issue, but should be left for engineering and planning to evaluate and ultimately to council for final decision. They suggested on-site parking be utilized as either entirely residential or entirely commercial rather than a mixture, which could lead to confusion. They further confirmed visual separation elements that denote private and public spaces, such as additional glazing, a tall sculpture planter, juxtaposition of roofing, vertical color to separate the building, and alternate entry for private and residences. Lastly, the panel questioned whether the approval of an overheight building will set a precedent for other buildings to be built over height, and they confirmed with staff that the C2 zone does not contain lot coverage nor roof height components to it. And ultimately, the panel recommended that council consider the approval of the proposal. Staff further review the proposal and note that due to the magnitude of the on-site parking variance requests, that staff recommend that conditions be placed on the development permit, ensuring that the developer provide the transportation demand management strategies highlighted in the parking study provided by Watt Consulting Group attached to this report, as well as the assurances stated with the applicant's design rationale letter. As listed within the attached draft development permit, these include requiring the developer to provide a restroom, which is to be open 24 hours a day on the first floor of the building for use of BC Transit bus operators, that the permit holder registers for the BC Transit EcoPass program for developers to provide an annual transit pass to each dwelling unit within the building, which is a total of 6. That the permit holder procures electric bicycle for each dwelling unit, again, it's a total of 6. And the District of Oak Bay and permit holder enter into a housing agreement requiring that the developer provide that all dwelling units be used as rental housing for perpetuity, that no age restrictions be placed on the occupants of the dwelling units, and that the dwelling units be used for residential purposes only and not for travel accommodation. And a copy of the draft housing agreement is attached to this report for council's consideration. As the subject property is located within the commercial and mixed-use development permit area, the form and character of the development is subject to review in accordance with the associated commercial and mixed-use development permit area guidelines. Staff have reviewed the proposal and determined that it is in keeping with the commercial and mixed-use development permit area guidelines and respects the scale and character of the neighborhood by utilizing an arts and craft architectural style commonplace in South Oak Bay and through the use of high-quality finishes. Therefore, staff consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. As previously mentioned, should council wish to move forward with authorizing the subject development permit and development variance permit applications, the development variance permit would require that staff undertake notification to adjacent property owners in accordance with the land use procedures bylaw, and the application would return to council for final consideration at a future meeting date. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and I believe the applicant, Peter Hardcastle, is in attendance tonight to answer any questions council may have. I also believe he has a brief presentation of his own to present to council as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I do see Mr. Hardcastle here with us this evening as well, so welcome to the meeting, sir. And yes, you're welcome to, if you wish to present briefly an overview of the application, you may do so at this time. And then we'll get to questions to either staff or council, or staff or the applicant following that.
Thank you. As mentioned, I am Peter Hardcastle on behalf of Hillel Architecture and on behalf of Novus Properties. 713 St. Patrick is in a context of an existing vibrant business corner. The vintage building shown here in white is non-conforming to the setbacks, and it's not currently financially viable. It was built in 1948. It is 73 years old now, and it existed before the even paving of these roads. It's no longer safe when we look at building codes for seismic upgrading and and the like, nor is it revenue self-supporting, and it's even unable to finance its own repairs, which get more extensive all the time. If you look at our architectural offices, which are across the street previously, before the roads were paved, you used to walk up 4 risers to 697 St. Patrick's Street. And before paving, you used to walk up 3 risers to get into the market building at 713 St. Patrick's Street. And yet today, this vintage building is in a depression with surrounding areas draining towards her. And sadly, if there wasn't a little kicker at the front door, water would just flow inside the building as well. But what a great role it has played. It has played this over a long period of time. And this intersection really deserves a dynamic, vibrant building filled with life and filled with potential. We have used vintage and new homes along St. Patrick's Street in reference when speaking with neighbors. We have similarly used vintage and heritage homes shown on the bottom as a screen along Oliver Street, which are close by, both referred to in those discussions with neighbors. And that was a critical part of this project, consult with neighbors. So we consulted first. We had 2 presentations to local building owners, both June 10th and June 15th in 2019, to seek their input prior to the final building design. The goal is a dynamic location for small-scale local businesses, provide a few long-term, absolutely necessary rental units, not short-term rental accommodation, and to respect that local context, the surrounding scale and materials and finishes, consistent with everything the neighbors expressed and consistent very much so with the Oak Bay development guidelines. Provide a dynamic business environment to elicit pride of place by neighbors and businesses, and all of these photographs are great examples of communities which care about their locations. They're very dynamic, and they're a melting pot for a community. And every effort was made to respect what the existing zone would permit. It doesn't have a building ridge height, but it does have a series of other heights. And where 2 stories were not viable, the goal was, how close could we get? How close could we get to what was permitted? So on the right-hand side of your screen is a potential 2-story building that isn't viable. And on the left-hand side of the screen, our 3-story building, which is, or is closed. And it starts with a dynamic end at St. Patrick's Street where we have public seating. It is a melting pot for community conversation. We have patron seating up against the commercial face of the building. It is a dynamic, colorful, engaging environment, but it purposefully goes quiet along Central. This is the residential zone in the building. This is where we have some protected entranceways, and this is where we have residential only parking, which was the outcome of our parking studies. Make this residential only. So here we have a dynamic business front facing St. Patrick's Street, and then you can see across this elevation, the building slowly fades in its tone to the very quiet residential end on purpose. This building was unanimously approved by the advisory design panel without a single change to the exterior of the building, which is a compliment and we love it. The commercial area is smaller than the existing commercial spaces, and it reduces those parking demands accordingly. The goal was to create better space for that task, not more space. By doing so, we have generated sufficient room that we have, as was mentioned, a bus operator staff room, accessible only to operators of BC Transit. We have a universally acceptable public washroom. We have a potential location for outdoor vending and food and beverages for both commuters on the bike, neighborhood members, and the bus drivers. And we have a commuter's bike room for the residents, all of them with covered entranceways which protect them during foul weather. And 713 St. Patrick's Street interior side yards are fully fenced and quiet when adjacent to neighboring properties. And these same interior elevations demonstrate the details and materials synonymous with the front of the building. This is not a secondary elevation in any way. It is handsome on all sides. And those sloped roofs avoid shadowing the neighbors to the north. And actually, one of those neighbors is one of those supportive 31 letters that were submitted to Oak Bay on behalf of this project. Each of the residential floors above contain 3 units, and the third floor units are accommodated entirely within the roof. There are 3 variances requested that respond to definitions of building height, just because in Oak Bay, there are 3 different ways of defining building height. And there is a parking variance that is requested, but only after providing equivalent alternatives. So a parking consultant was brought into the project. We are providing 4 covered stalls where the report stated 10 are actually calculated as required. And we have reduced these numbers by 6 electric bikes, a ground floor bike room, a lower floor bike room, all with charging, with 6 bus passes, 1 for each one of those unit holders. And combined, they exceed the recommendations of the report. And in closing, I just want to show you the elevation of the building as it was originally submitted when the tree canopy was 28%. And it did not respond at that time to a request for considerations of climate change. And we end on this photograph, which is responding to climate change and with the tree canopy now passing the 30%. And I'd love to have the opportunity to speak more about this tonight if I can. My 5 minutes are up, so I will leave this now. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. I'm sure we have a number of questions from council, either to you or to staff. So I'm going to go to Councillor Green, then Patterson to start us off. Welcome. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Hardcastle, thank you very much for the presentation. And you might remember me from 2019. I sit as liaison to the advisory design panel, in fact, and I was there at the meeting when this project was discussed. I'm encouraged that it's rental housing and that it will be that it will remain long-term rental housing. That's, I think, very important to all of us and to the community. Just a couple of questions. You refer to a public washroom, and I'm just wondering who will maintain that washroom? That's just one question. And bus passes, you said, would be provided. Who will pay for the bus passes, or how are they calculated? And thirdly, will there be any below-market rental opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Unfortunately, because of the
Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Unfortunately, because of the number of units, these are our market rental housing. But it's important to note that in this community, many people are preferring to age in place, and we are crying out for quality rental accommodations in this particular location. The bus passes are provided by the owner and developer of the building, and 1 bus pass is provided for each of the residential units in the building. And that was part of the assessment of the parking requirements for the building. The universally accepted washroom, I would have assumed, would have been maintained by the owner of the building and the commercial presences that are in the building when they're open and operating. The BC Transit Authority actually leases the bus operator's room. They currently have what I will politely call the equivalent of an outhouse almost on the property. So we're giving them a quality enclosure. I have interviewed multiple bus drivers. Those multiple bus drivers did speak to us about what kind of services they need. So instant hot water dispensing, microwave ovens, and some things that I thought they would want, which we had designed into there, like lockers for their personal belongings. And it turns out that they have excellent lockers on the buses. So talking to them changed the nature of the room that's been designed for them, and they become one of the permanent leaseholders in the building. And we have letters of support underway from BC Transit as well, both from the union and the administration offices.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just one follow-up question. Thank you. And through you, Mayor, to Mr. Hardcastle, thank you very much for your responses. And just a couple of follow-up questions. One, how do you define market rent at the moment in Oak Bay? That's just one question. And the other one is, the only concern I have about designating the washroom as public, we just want to make sure that that doesn't imply that it is the municipality who is responsible for the maintenance and cleanliness of the washroom. So that's a really important point, and thank you for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
when I refer to a public washroom, it's a washroom serving the public, not a washroom maintained or provided by a public body such as the municipality of Oak Bay. I assumed that this would be open during the times that the commercial tenants are open for business and not after hours. And it would be maintained somewhat between the owners of the building and the owners of those leaseholders of the commercial spaces. And we can certainly confirm that in writing. I don't want to speak out of turn on behalf of others, but I will gladly clarify for that. But that is what I believe would be occurring.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hardcastle. Oh, and can you define market rental?
I cannot, other than that expression usually means that what is an appropriate value for the quality and the size of the spaces that are being provided. We have 4 one-bedroom rental accommodations, and we have 2 twin-bedroom rental accommodations. And those twin bedroom accommodations are 2 bedrooms and 2 washrooms, providing the most flexible lifestyle to meet the requirements of those both in their neighborhood and those that are seeking rental accommodation. But because of the size of the project, even as 3 stories, we have to appreciate that the building itself is only viable at 3 stories only because the developer and owner of the property is taking an exceptionally long view to investment strategies. A typical developer could not develop a building in this location, I don't think, at this size.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. I now have Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Zelka.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just, I too, as Councillor Green stated, appreciate that this is being developed as rental housing, but I might come at the comparative to market rental in another fashion, just wondering what information is available for projected rental rates comparative to market rental in the district and in the region to meet the OCP objectives.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Hardcastle, are you able to answer that question?
And that is outside my field of expertise. As an architectural office, we are designing spaces, but not assembling the finances for them. And we could certainly submit something like this in writing if you wished. Typically, market rental as an expression is just what is commonplace in the market for those bedrooms, those areas that are provided, those facilities in the building, and the like.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. If I could just ask a few questions about accessibility, probably to, I think, Mr. Hardcastle, but it does state in the presentation that there are ramps to the commercial. I'm wondering if you could also speak to other accessibility features that are in the building, particularly availability of handicap parking, the space within the rental units to accommodate accessibility for people who may have mobility impairments, and perhaps in addition to the electrical bicycle parking that is available, whether that also means other forms of transportation like motorized wheelchairs or scooters.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you. I'm going to return to this image because this is a suitable one. When we discussed recently, the project was adapted for climate change, and the building was raised out of the ground. But you'll notice people are still able to walk directly off of St. Patrick Street right into the commercial end of the building, that dynamic, busy, colorful end of the building. And that elevated walkway proceeds all the way down the central street frontage towards the entranceways to the residential housing. I think this is a much better elevation because it was raised out of the ground, because we have those planters across the front of that central street elevation. Down by the residences, yes, there are stairs up to that entranceway, but it's completely connected at the other side of the building on St. Patrick Street. Similarly, the parking is accessible to anybody. Some of the features, such as the operator's The bus operator's room clearly has a staircase going up to it, but all of the operators for the buses have to be physically able to actually do their jobs. But all of those other facilities, a commuter's bike room, which can be used for scooters, and we would certainly permit that to happen in the building, or through the use of the lower floor bicycle room, which is also generous and will permit the use of scooters. But the commuter's bike room is on a universally accessible podium like the rest of the building, as is the public washroom, as is access to a potential location for food and beverage dispensing machines. So outside of the building, it is fully approachable by those who are physically disabled. The units themselves, I can't flip back easily to the floor plans, but certainly units can be designed so that we can accommodate those physically disabled within the open formats that we have in those buildings. Because we have, in such a small building, one of the things that makes it so prohibitively expensive to build is there are 6 units here distributed over 2 floors. That means we have twin exit stair towers in there and a full service elevator. And that permits a physically disabled person to enjoy this building as their home, be accessible to any one of the 3 floors above grade and the 1 floor below grade, which also is personal storage accommodations and another bike room. Because there's the potential of scooters in the building, providing electrical plug-ins for every single owner-owned bicycle, and for each of the 6 electric bikes that are provided as common property for the building. It means certainly we have adequate power, and if somebody has a scooter, they're certainly welcome to charge their scooter in the building as well. And that means in this location where we have seen such a remarkable increase in people using electric bikes to do regular missions, it's contributing a great deal to decreasing the pressure on the parking on the community surrounding this particular building. And happy that it is.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. So for clarification then, in the rental units themselves, the door widths and the corridor widths would permit accessibility. They're the dimensions for the correct accessibility features.
Mr. Hardcastle?
Yes, we should be able to make these units accessible by those who are physically disabled, and we can accommodate design criteria for them. They have some generous spaces in them and some limited spaces in other places, but we can make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could now ask a couple of questions just about the business plans. I noticed that the proposed commercial spaces, there's 3 of them that are outlined in the plans. They're fairly small. I'm wondering what types of business uses were determined to be suitable for this location in units of those sizes.
Mr. Hardcastle?
Happy to answer the question. So you're looking at a floor plan that has the potential to divide this single commercial space into several potential tenancies. Yes, some of them would be quite small. It's important that in this day and age that we design a building that it could have a single commercial tenant, and we take that into account with fire exit doors and probable entranceway doors for it. But it's also important, and especially in this location, that we design a building in such a manner that there are some logical ways to divide up the spaces, because you can be approached by somebody who wants a limited amount of space. I can tell you that this market building has been occupied by the equivalent of a grocery shop called Casey's for many, many years of its life. And Casey's is something that the neighbors have all expressed they would wish return to this location if it could be. Numerous other potential tenants have been considered. There is currently some well-appreciated tenants in the building at the moment, which again would be given opportunities to relocate in the new building. But we do envision it as a place to provide retail to the community, food and beverages to the community, to service the community in the way this site always has in the past. And part of designing the exterior fenestration is to make us be able to view all of the products and services inside as if it was a Casey's. Making sure that we have multiple doorways so that if there is a smaller version of that in one portion of the building, that another piece is available for a different use. And there are a number of tenancies that have been considered, and a number of who have approached us since viewing the building. And the important thing here is to make sure that we have this really viable market building that attracts good businesses and attracts support and kind of pride from the community. We have participated in a number of mixed-use buildings like this, and that's where some of those photographs came from, is what makes a building successful so it attracts those tenants and keeps them in a viable position.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to, I think, Mr. Hardcastle still. Just talking about the BC Step Code compliance, could you elaborate on what performance measure will be met? I'm presuming perhaps Step 3 is not Step 4, which is net zero.
Thank you,
Well,
Councillor
we have
Patterson.
considered.
Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
We have considered to date, yes, conformance with all the requirements that Oak Bay would have us design the building to meet, which could include Step 3 of the building code. It's important to note that a traditional slope roof like this is going to provide us some opportunities for solar panels, and we will be actually pre-conduiting solar panels down into the electrical room. There is the potential for hot water preheat on the roof as well. The building is going to be designed so it has LED lighting throughout all of its public spaces as a means of reducing its energy consumption. The building designed to the standard with the quality of glazing that we have envisioned on the building. It'll be a welcomed contribution to the built environment in Oak Bay, and should be exceeding the minimum requirements from the building code. Also, we find that the very educated public in our municipality of Oak Bay, where I both live and work, that's a very informed public. They also insist that when they are renting or leasing accommodations, they expect a high level of performance, and we're happy to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for that information, Mr. Hardcastle. You spoke about the photovoltaics. I noticed that it's referenced that the provision has been made for photovoltaics, certainly on the roofing system, but not for incorporating them into the project. What are the plans for incorporating photovoltaics into the project?
Mr. Hardcastle.
By installing conduit runs down to the electrical room, we can actually get an installation on a roof and quickly and easily feed it down through a multifamily building. Installing that now during construction is possible in a way that is just not possible in the future. And the traditional sloped roofs, especially the ones in this building, you'll notice we have traditional gable-ended dormers on that third floor, and it gives us sloped roofs that accommodate photovoltaics in a manner that, as our world progresses, they become more affordable. Then it's certainly a way of reducing the electrical demand coming in the building. Or to use it similarly for hot water preheat, if that turns out to be in the near future the most appropriate use of those roof spaces. So the building has a chance to move gracefully as it ages in this place, and accommodate accommodate technologies which help with climate change.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll ask one last question before I pass it on to other members of council. In the development package, it talks about the stormwater management system. What exactly is planned for the stormwater management system?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Hardcastle.
and I haven't received, I haven't not read in order to prepare for today the statement that was made, but there is a stormwater assessment that was made that is submitted with this package in order to make sure that we are adequately handling those responsibilities. I do have a copy here of it. I can certainly flip to it. It'll just take me a few moments to do so.
Do you wish an answer, Councillor Patterson, or is it sufficient that process goes through the staff review and meets the requirements?
My question was more: is it just a standard stormwater management drainage system, or is there actually some other opportunities to contain and reuse stormwater?
Thank you. You may be able to answer that one more easily, Mr. Hardcastle.
Yes, there's the potential of having retaining tanks or retaining pipes on the site. So as it takes its stormwater load, these are trickle fed over a longer period of time into the stormwater system, so it doesn't overwhelm the system during peak storm events. And it is likely the nature of the systems that are proposed to the sites.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Zelka, then Ney. Anybody else have questions? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for this very interesting proposal. I've been quite intrigued reading through this rather large package, and as I come up with objections, you seem to have already considered them, and then I find the results already there. This is very strange. What about solar panels? And then you've already said it. What about the pre-conduct of hot water on the roof? And you've already thought about it. It's like, oh my God. I'm very impressed. I want to say that so far. And I do very much also appreciate the incredible amount of work that went into the design. And I was intrigued how you were able to provide a design that, even though it had to be elevated for potential climate concerns, I must admit, the second one, even though it's higher and potentially is, from one perspective, more objectionable, it actually ends up being much more, in some ways, from maybe a placemaking perspective, much more desirable. So I'm very, very impressed with your design work on this. I wanted to just share that as a comment to start. But I do reference, let's see, page 56 of the package. There's 135 pages in the package on this item in the agenda. Page 56, 57 makes reference to the development permit, the proposed development permit that we, council, would be passing, assuming we approve this development going forward. And that development permit provides the attachments and the conditions that would ride with the land. There's 4 conditions, of course: the restroom and the passes for developers, the electric bicycles for the residents. But I wanted to ask a question about number 4, having to do with agreeing that the units would be for residential housing only, no age restrictions, and that the development units would be for residential purposes only and not as travel accommodation. We have added housing agreements to other properties. For example, the Abstract building on Bowker. It also has a housing a contract that excludes travel accommodation. However, that is enforced, or at least the way it's written on that other housing agreement, it's enforced by the strata over there. The question, I'll start with you, and then it may have to go to staff. How would we enforce this restriction on travel accommodation, please?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Hardcastle, if you can't answer that, you may. Otherwise, I may go to staff on this one. Mr. Hardcastle,
I would happily give my opinion while the staff are considering their own. One means of registering this on the property is through a covenant, so it becomes a permanent promise registered on title, which would secure this as rental accommodations, and rental accommodations that is not geared to short-term and transient accommodation, but geared to long-term residential tenancies. That is the intent of the project, and there must be some form of acceptable ways of registering on title or signing a housing agreement, which itself is registered on title to secure that event.
Thank you. Anything to add, Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would agree that a covenant would be one option that we could utilize to ensure that these conditions are met for perpetuity. But with this housing agreement, staff felt that that was sufficient in itself to hold I guess the property owner accountable to ensure that these measures are put in place for perpetuity.
Great, thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor
And then
Zelka. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Weber. I thought you were finished.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add, our bylaw staff too, they actively enforce, short-term rental housing and our regulations or lack of regulations on those within Oak Bay. So certainly from an enforcement action or an enforcement side, if we were made aware of this at a future date, we can certainly act on it then.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, just trying to figure out the mechanisms. I mean, for a strata, it seems fairly straightforward. But for us, us being the district and our district staff, who are made aware, most likely by a neighbor or who knows how they would be made aware, maybe an ad in one of the newspapers. How would we have to get a court order? Would it be something on title, and then when the building is sold 60 years from now,
Councillor
we get our money back?
Sure, Councillor Zelka. I think we're going way into the weeds on this one for a building application, but Ms. Varela, you had maybe an answer?
Your Worship, if this is a matter that council wants more information on prior to actual consideration of the development permit and the development variance permit, staff could provide that at the future meeting.
Councillor Zelka, is this something?
That would be satisfactory. I would be very much interested in knowing that. And I also wish just to finally say that I'm very impressed with the design, and I do look forward to seeing what the public has to say once we provide notice to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I have Councillor Ney, then Appleton, and then I'm assuming Braithwaite as well. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you, Mr. Hardcastle, for presenting this application so clearly. There is lots to like here from my perspective. I do have a few questions, some just for clarification, and others sort of just I have some questions about. So one of them, you've got a lot of supportive letters here, I do note. And I was just wondering, as I was going through there, have you got support of the person directly to the north of this on St. Pat's? That would be 723. I couldn't see it in the, maybe it was there. I just went through it fairly quickly there. Are the immediate neighbors in support of this project? That's really my question.
Mr. Hardcastle?
And proud to say yes. So on the north side of the property, for everybody else, we had designed this traditional sloped roof, and it greatly minimizes the shadowing on their property. And they are one of the first signatories of the letter. They have been a participant of this in this project, kind of designed from the very beginning.
Okay, that's good. So the other thing I was wondering, we've gone through this pandemic, and then the heat domes that we've been having, and I'd like to, I'm wondering if you could help me understand I heard you talking with Councillor Patterson about you'd be meeting our building code requirements, and that it would be at code 3, but can you tell me what you had in mind for ventilation heating for this building?
On the top of the two stair towers, concealed behind their parapets, are two flat roof sections, which we can provide electric heat pumps and provide air conditioning, quality air conditioning into those spaces. Because of the design of the window system, we're able to have both low and high ventilating units, so we get a good circulation of space. Quality windows to make sure that there's a limited absorption of heat in the first place is paramount. Having a raised attic space above those units and having that power ventilated gives those upper units. And we all know what it's like to be in a heritage building with a sloped roof, but a very limited amount of insulation. And in this particular building, Higher quality insulation is of course available than any of us would expect in a heritage building. But with a ventilated attic space as well, we can provide a cushion from these daytime extreme temperatures that we have started to experience more and more.
So I mean, I don't understand it all technically, Mr. Hardcastle, but would it be safe to say that if somebody were residing here, that they could adjust the temperature in such a way
Correct.
that, and ventilate so that the air is, filtered, and that the temperature can be regulated in such a way that they would not be encumbered by, the varying heat conditions exterior to the building?
Yes, I'm proud to say that if we're providing a heat pump, that means those residential units will have the opportunity to have cooling in the summer. And that becomes pretty important and quite paramount for us to consider for those who are residing in the neighborhood and want so much to rent something in this neighborhood so that they can age in place, taking care of those individuals to make sure that they have a cool and comfortable environment during those heat waves, but also families. So if we take the other end of that spectrum with 2-bedroom units available, it's really important if we have young family members as well, that they are equally protected from these rapid heat gains. And a higher performing building is better at resisting the heat gain that comes. So the higher the performance of the thermal assemblies in the building, be they windows, doors, the wall systems, the roof, greatly increases the comfort over most of the aging vintage buildings in this community.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And then finally, parking, the famous parking topic. I can see you've got a study here, and you've spent a lot of time trying to understand this and the needs, etc. So what I've understood is that you're proposing 4 parking spaces.
Correct.
And you did have a tabulation there of showing that the needs exceed what you're able to provide, but you've got some other remedies, suggested remedies, to mitigate demand on those parking spaces or on-street parking. But so one of the the question I have is you've got a fleet of electric bikes that the property owner would make available to
Correct.
tenants in the property. So how does the business of that all work? And I mean, presumably if that was the case and these variances for parking were had, and you're talking about bus passes as well, but so how do they maintain them? Like, would there be certain standards, like bikes wear out after a time? Who looks after that? It sounds kind of complicated for a property manager to deal with, but can you just give me some, you must have thought it through, somebody must have. How will all that work?
Go ahead.
I will gladly answer that question. So there's a number of multifamily buildings, a number of us as architectural firms that are using electric bikes as a very suitable means of reducing the amount of built parking area, and especially over the period of time when we expect less and less cars to be used, certainly in locations like this, very close to services. So the electric bikes, purchased and owned by the building, commonly maintained by the building. If a resident wishes to take one of these electric bikes out, they're typically swiping some form of Visa card or something, which is their deposit to make sure that the bike is returned in safe and working order. We have a number of buildings where the number of bikes being provided is quite substantial. And when we're providing 1 bike per unit, what statistically that means is 2 people might reside in a unit and they take out those 2 bikes on Saturday morning, they do some groceries, they return it, plug it in. A single individual perhaps takes it out later on that afternoon. And those bikes are regenerated over time. They're provided by the building, but it's unlimited use by the residents only. In addition to that, we are providing storage space for resident-owned bikes. So what if the residents already have a bike, but they have 1 electric bike, they could just take the other one out with them. It's just a means of making sure that, and a traffic consultant records this as trips per day. So how can we take the residential requirement for parking and start to reduce it? And one way of reducing it is bus passes. One way of reducing it is providing electric bikes. One way of reducing it is to make sure that you're building these kind of buildings as close as possible to services. I love this dynamic street corner where our office is located, where we have formerly Casey's and we now have florists, Delish. It's quite a melting pot of a community, and we're only minutes away from downtown Oak Bay. So I think electric bikes here, when they were assessed, not by me, but by an unbiased professional, it's the number of trips per day that are being reduced, where there is this factual benefit that they can say, okay, if we've predicted 10 cars are actually required, how can we get it down logically to the 4 that are actually provided? And then those 4, they really want it designated as residential only so that the parking lot is quiet. This is less trips per day coming in and out of that parking lot. And there is no confusion with commercial patrons wanting to find a place to park. This is residential parking. So for those who do own a car, there is still facilities for them as well.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I have one more question, and thank you for that. I really did want to know more detail because, you know, this effort to disincentivize car use, and there are reasons you're doing it because there are constraints on the property, but it does also meet our larger, you know, community goal around trying to get people out of cars and using other modes of transportation. So thank you for that explanation. So the final one has to do with the parking that you were just referring to, and you've answered part of my question. It sounds like it'll be used for residents who I guess there's a, you know, they get in line and first come, first serve or something like that. I'm not sure how you do that, but that's not really my question. My question is, will those have electric charging stations?
They will.
They will. Okay. And how are those charged? Do they go up to units, or are they charged using the charge card, you know, system? How does that, and will they already be installed, the charging stations in the stalls? So yeah. Okay.
Integral to the construction documents, there will be a power outlet for each one of those cars. Sometimes in a larger multifamily building, physical distance prevents you from actually wiring an individual stall to a unit, or you might not want to if you want to reassign reassign who uses those stalls. So because we have 6 units and 4 parking stalls, they would be wired into the charging location for the common power for the building. But it does not preclude the potential for them to have a way of receiving payment for the electricity provided. But there are choices that can be exercised over the passage of time in the building as well. Okay. But because there's 6 units and 4 parking stalls, they should be wired unbiasedly to the house power so that parking can be reassigned based on who needs the parking when they're signing their rental agreement.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Next, I have Councillor Appleton, then Braithwaite, then I'll go to myself, and I'll go to second-time speakers. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Mr. Hardcastle, for your presentation. I was encouraged in your presentation with the specific mention or specific reference to missing middle housing, which is definitely on my mind, and I think the community's mind as far as provision of housing options in the community. I'm wondering, just with respect to your profession and the work that you do, whether you might be able to speak a little bit more, just briefly and broadly about the types of construction that are happening of this nature. This, I think, is going to be the type of building that we will see in these types of scenarios and is needed in that missing middle context. So just wondering whether you could comment on sort of the nature of the design and sort of overall trends in design shift and overall designs as is presented here with a significant reduction in vehicle parking and encouraging mode shift.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Happy to. Certainly, we're going to witness in a very short period of time a dramatic drop in the number of cars that are being accommodated in buildings, and the number of trips per day that are being used by residences in rental accommodations or owned accommodations. We're going to witness a decrease in the number of personally owned cars. From an accommodations point of view, we're also witnessing as well in a larger urban context downtown, a remarkable number of very small units being designed, and that actually encourages a higher, more frequent turnover of residents. Whereas here we have the very formal structure of not a studio apartment, but a one-bedroom apartment, which is suitable for all age groups. And I have to pay keen attention to the maturity of the audience we have in this community. As well, when we have 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom units, these units are most able to accommodate everybody from grandparents who want young ones to visit, young families having their first child, empty nesters who need a second bedroom for offices, for home theaters. So those 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom units are highly sought after. And we have one particular building underway now in the city of Victoria, which almost every unit in the building is 2-bedroom, 2-bath. We have similar ones located on Obed Street, which is focusing as well on larger square footage units, because we have an abundance of small ones. But if you want to build a community, and if you want a rental accommodation that will attract a tenant and then hold them so they become a part of that community, we need to make sure that those highly sought after units are what we're actually providing. And micro units just don't serve what is an increasing and growing demand for rental accommodations. And in this particular location, the owner has a very long-term interest in the well-being of this building, in providing accommodations for tenants that they don't want to turn over. They want to make sure that these people call this location home and they're there for a long period of time. Every landlord should be thinking that, but not all of them do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hardcastle. I do have a number of questions, and first I would like to say I do love the design of the building. I think it's a beautiful building, and I think that in the right place it would do very well. I want to talk a little bit about, you're talking about how the location or the current location or the current business there is not currently financially viable. I think it was, the business that was there was financially viable for a number of years. But when you're talking about your new building, you said it's close to viable. So I'm wondering if you could explain why you're just saying it's close to viable and what would make it viable.
Thank you, Councillor.
It's actually more, it's more of a compliment to the owners and developers. If I look at typically the number of units that are being built relative to the expenses that goes into foundations, to elevators, to stair towers, it takes a certain amount of units in order for you to pay for those common spaces. We only have 6 units here. So the owner developer has taken a very long-term look at what they expect as revenue, paying down that debt over a period of time. If this was configured as, let's say, as a condominium where individual units would be sold off, there's just insufficient number of units to pay for the elevators and stair towers where we have to provide as a necessity. Typically, some of those projects that become viable, that are 3 stories high, they become viable when you have 27, 30, 33 units, not 6. So we have a remarkable number of services being provided here, and the revenue coming from the commercial spaces, and only 6 units to pay for it. The existing building is just suffering from the passage of time. It is low in a depression. It is wet a lot of times. It has suffered a lot over its lifespan of 73 years without change, without modification, without addition. It is just simply an old building meeting today's code requirements, meeting today's safety requirements, installing a fire alarm, installing sprinklers, installing seismic upgrading. Any of these things are just not viable. But also the simple act of replacing its roof, they become such huge expenses on a very modest income stream coming from the commercial tenancies. So the existing building isn't capable of supporting itself well. In this location, the land is very expensive. So by the time you look at viable build-outs, a 3-story building relative to the price of the land is a very difficult thing to do on short-term benefit. So I find it's a very expensive building to undertake for the number of units and the number of commercial area that is available for lease. But the owners and developers have just taken a very long-term view to that investment outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I would counter that with basically they made the investment in that land knowing full well how much the land was and what was allowable to have on that land. My next question, I think, has to go to staff, and that is, I did ask a question earlier today about what the maximum coverage of this property was, and it says that the answer I got was that the existing building covers about 43%, and the proposed building will cover about 59%. Was I correct in hearing when staff were talking at the beginning that a C2 has no lot coverage limit? Did I hear that correctly?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I guess it's Mr. Weber I'll probably go to on this one, who know our rules. Mr. Weber, can you answer that question?
Thank you. Yes, you're correct. There is no lot coverage limit or maximum permitted floor area ratio within this particular zone.
Thank you. And so just going a little bit further on that, I noticed that this building has a heck of a lot of hardscape around it. By looking at the drawings, it seems to me that, if it's 59% lot coverage, it looks like there's about 38% or so hardscape coverage. So is there any limit on hardscape coverage on this zone?
Mr. Weber, why don't you answer the question about what's allowed, and I'll perhaps give Mr. Hardcastle a chance to explain the hardscaping coverage. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. No particular requirements for this zone, and I don't believe there's any design guidelines that specifically speak to the choice of materials for hardscape in terms of permeability.
So, Mr. Hardcastle, perhaps you can just talk to the hardscaping that's proposed for the site?
It is reduced somewhat from the existing facilities that are on the site at the moment. And from the time the building was originally designed, both the landscape architect and the planning department have sculpted more and more green space on this property. I think one of the very pleasant benefits that was mentioned earlier about climate change forcing a building rise is, I think, uniformly all of us probably feel that the building is far better now raised out of the ground with an increased amount of green space around it. When originally conceived, we were under 30% of the tree canopy coverage. We are now at, I believe, the most recent calculations were 33% tree canopy coverage, which I'm pleased to have on the site. So we have undertaken to provide as much green space as we can. Clearly on the St. Patrick Street frontage, there are large elements of green boulevard space. And also the neighborhood has requested an extent of public seating because this corner lot has always been the melting pot for the community. This particular property is where people meet, where people walk their dogs in the morning and end up having a cup of coffee here. So providing some public seating for that, we needed to make sure there was a certain amount of hardscaping around and between those public seating areas in order to make sure that functioned correctly. So we have a building that is trying to be as gentle as we can on our environment, providing the maximum tree canopy we can on the size, and we have exceeded the tree canopy requirements. There was not a minimum amount of green space in this particular zoning, but we have endeavored to provide plants and green space frequently around the lot, and also in front of multiple entranceways to the commercial spaces. You'll notice even more planting provided in planters that are irrigated, that are part of the character of the building as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. You did mention about the letters that of support that were in. Can you tell me what rendition of this plan the people who signed these letters saw? Was it the 2-story plan or the 3-story plan?
There was never a 2-story plan. The 2-story elevation that I showed earlier in my presentation was an example only to Mayor and Council of the efforts that we had put in to define what the building could be within its zoning and how close could we get to it. The public did not see a 2-story solution at any time, and the public had been mentioned in both of those presentations. And we used some of the houses on Oliver Street, which are visible from the windows of our office where we actually hosted those evenings. And so people could physically see a building in close proximity that was very similar in style and volume as what we were going to propose.
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Okay, so did they see the same rendition that we are seeing today?
Mr. Hardcastle?
Yes, with the exception, I assume, over the building being raised for climate change. So as those letters were being sought from individuals, I'm sure they were shown the copy of the drawings, and it could have been drawings before or after that. But the worst case scenario would have been the 3-story building before it was lifted.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I do have a couple of more questions. And my next one I'm going to ask is in regards to, actually, Councillor Ney touched on this a little bit, and so I'll thank her for asking a couple of the questions that I had. And you were able to answer in regards to the electric bikes and how that works. My question would be, if a bike is damaged or stolen or lost, does it then get replaced? And does that happen in perpetuity?
Mr. Hardcastle?
Yes, theoretically, this happens in perpetuity. So in projects far larger than this, when we might be dealing with a fleet of 24 bikes, when an owner signs out a bike, they are responsible for the bike, just like any of us. If we were to rent a kayak for a day, rent a sailboat for a day, you are renting an electric bike, owned common property by the building. And so you are responsible for the bike as long as it's in your hands. And when the bikes are returned, they have to be in suitable shape. Bikes do get damaged over time. Batteries do lose their charge. Things have to be replaced, but those 6 bikes will be in the building for the life of the building. They are part of that package of agreements that has been agreed to as a minimum level of service provided by the owners and developers of the building. So there will always be 6 operable bikes, and from time to time a bike will have to be replaced because it has aged or it has been damaged. But the owners, the renters are responsible for it as soon as they remove it from the building. And that's principally where most wear and tear happens, is when they're out and about and being used, rather than when they're in the building in storage. But because people have to sign them out, and you have to let's say, swipe a credit card in order to take a bike away from the building, you can track who has used the bike. Some of the agreements that are out there with apps, we can monitor who is using them the most, how many miles are going on to the bikes, how much the bikes are being used, how many minutes they're being used per trip. There's a variety of feedback that's coming out of the the monitoring of those electric bikes, which allows people to then use them statistically to predict benefit to the public, benefit to the environment, benefit to the building, and the reduction of a known outcome in residential trips per day out to things like grocery shops and dentists and things like this.
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I did read the parking report. Thank you very much for that. That was really, really helpful. And I noted in the parking report a line that I found really interesting. It said that the existing transit service is limited in frequency and would therefore need to be improved to make transit into a more viable option for this site. So, I mean, that's interesting, I thought, because here you are supplying bus passes to people when in the actual report it says that the transit system needs to be improved.
Mr. Hardcastle, can you address that?
Yes, we're fortunate to be able to look at buildings over a longer time span. So we have a number of routes that service this location at the moment, and we're providing a quality bus operator's room. So if we know that over the passage of time, the density of the neighborhood goes up, those service facilities are there, they can more frequently run the same buses through here. They can coordinate it and run more bus routes through here over the passage of time. By securing that bus operator's room, which is a leasehold within the building, they currently have a leasehold independent of the existing market building. It's a small freestanding shed outhouse-like facility at the moment. This is a far higher quality facility they're going to be provided. But when they have these facilities over the passage of time, if they are going to increase the number of routes that are passing through here or increase the number of trips per day that an existing bus route takes, by securing their involvement in this project, we've secured this particular intersection, this particular location as far more important to them managing new routes and increasing the frequency of existing routes. It's a coup to have them on the property. It's great to have them here. It was good to interview bus drivers and to get their feedback, and we changed the nature of the facilities because of their feedback. So you have unions supporting this location, you have administration supporting this location. As an architectural firm, I can't increase the number of bus routes, but it seems like we've done everything possible to increase the potential of those bus routes over the passage of time. So what is infrequent today, and we are meeting the traffic engineer's study requirements and still meeting our parking objectives, we know over the passage of time, the bus service is just going to improve. And one of the ways we have ensured that is providing them a hub of services in this site. And everybody in the neighborhood knows we're going to benefit because of it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. Yeah. Interesting answer. So I know that I would have to agree that the existing bylaw saying that you needed 21 parking spots for this this building, I think that's quite outdated. However, I do believe that 4 is not enough, especially because that doesn't even meet the requirements of any spots for the commercial businesses in that area, in that building, nor, in my humble opinion, does it take into account really the parking from the other businesses surrounding there. I don't know if you had a chance to look at some of the letters that came in for this proposal. There was, I believe, 3 additional letters that had a couple of interesting questions or comments, and I just wanted to try and verify a couple of the comments with you, if I might. One of them was that there was only about 24 people that were consulted in regards to this proposal.
Mr. Hardcastle, how far did your consultation go?
We hosted two events here. where we have attendees, yes, probably attended by 24 people or more. We might have a record of those signatures in our office. We did try to accumulate those signatures that evening. And I'd have to say as well, over the 2 weeks following that evening, because our office is here, people would constantly be walking in our office and adding more commentary over the passage of time, because this is this corner is a melting pot for conversation in the community, and everybody was certainly aware of the building. And as was mentioned earlier, a 3-story building was mentioned right from the very beginning. And the purpose of those original events was to seek guidance from the neighbors. It was to have a meeting in order to define what did they miss when Casey's closed, what would they like in the community, what did they feel was missing in their community, and to understand what was an appropriate volume of building, what was an appropriate outcome, what could we do to respect the scale of the community, the materials, the surfaces. And as I had mentioned, there's 3 heritage and vintage homes visible from our windows in our office, which we used on both occasions as the conversation piece, so that they could see what approximately the height of a 3-story building is in this location, in this facility.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. I think it's worth noting for anybody watching at home as well, one of the directions here tonight is whether we send this out for public consultation. So they've done informal, but the formal is up to this body, obviously. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I have 2 more questions, Mayor. Also in the correspondence, it mentioned that the proponent actually owns the building that you're talking about having the office in, which is across the street. Is that correct?
Mr. Hardcastle?
They do. There is no development plans currently being configured for this site, and our office has recently restored and made perfectly acceptable the inside of this building. It's not under consideration for redevelopment, which I understand may have been one of the comments in those letters. This is a very different building where we are now than the original Casey's Market across the road. It was a very different building. It's also low. So where this building is high and dry, sadly this building is, the original Casey structure is low and wet. It is unfortunately deteriorating, whereas this one is not. It's a great building and we have no interest in going anywhere. This is both our residential sort of home environment and our office environment. I get to walk to work. I love it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And for my last question, this is probably going to be directed to staff, but I know that at number 4 on page 77 says the District of Oak Bay and the permit holder enter into a housing agreement requiring the following for perpetuity, that the dwelling units only be used as rental housing. So my question is, if in 5 years the proponent decides that it's not financially viable to have these as rental housing and they want to sell them off as condos, is there a possibility that they could come back to council and have this rescinded, this item rescinded, that they would only be used as rental housing?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. They would actually have to go back and get council approval in order to stratify the building into condo units. So at that time, you could make that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Yeah, down to the fundamental principles, we can't, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, fetter the decision-making of future councils. I have some questions, but I'm going to go through them very quickly, Mr. Hardcastle, if you don't mind. Just really yes or no. My read of the plans is that the public gathering spaces are really focused on the St. Patrick's side of the building. Is that correct?
Yes.
And question on awnings. In the drawings as they're laid out, there's no awnings over the residential windows for solar shading. It doesn't appear to be any awnings sort of over that public space on the St. Patrick's side. Is there any plans for that as we sort of look at these sort of the health of these public gathering spaces in particular. We're seeing a bit more demand for some of that sort of shoulder season protection.
There is the glass canopy that extends around the two sides of the commercial, so both on the St. Patrick face and on the central street face of those commercial units. There is a canopy over the entranceway to the residential portion of the building, and there is covered outdoor entranceways to the commuter's bike room on the ground floor, the vending machines, the public washrooms, and then a covered entranceway for the bus drivers themselves. They walk around to a more discreet location at the back of the building where they have their own bus operator's room. They actually want a slightly more discreet location for them to have a break away from the bus. They don't necessarily want to stand in front of the public. Sometimes they're making private phone calls to family members. So we do have protected outdoor spaces in a variety of locations around the building that gives the public cover during foul weather. And including at the moment, all we have is a bus station here at the moment that's providing that kind of shelter, which is often used by the public as a place to have a conversation. And perhaps over the passage of time with this building and with its covered outdoor spaces, some of the bus patron seating will be left for bus patrons, and the community will have other places to seat and other places to be covered. I think when you're returning, if you're a commuter on a bicycle as well, if you're returning to a building on a wet day, your bike is wet, your gear is wet, your helmet is wet, being able to pull into a covered location and then opening up, breaking a seal on a pannier, opening up your jacket and breaking a seal to get your keys out or to get out a key fob to open the door. It's all so much better when you've got a covered entranceway to do so. So we are emphasizing in all of our buildings, bike rooms that are accessible to commuters on the ground floor so you can just ride right in. And breaking the seal in a foul weather day to get your keys out is a part of.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. That's sufficient. Can I just ask the question on the? Has there been any consideration of awnings for particularly the south-facing windows facing onto Central? That's a very warm side of the building, and solar shading is a simple way of mitigating heating issues.
And we could certainly consider adding them. It was a conversation that didn't come up with the advisory design panel, but adding removable or fabric awnings to reduce that solar gain, or to put films on the windows themselves to actively resist that solar gain in a different mechanism. They're all certainly worthy of discussion.
Yeah, probably not so dependent on this discussion, but probably worthwhile. And I would suggest something similar to be thought about for the St. Patrick's side, just in terms of that public space, maybe for a shoulder season coverage areas, just for people to gather and in that side of the building, just up and down. It certainly helps with that gathering space, but I'll leave it entirely with you. I'm just throwing it out there as an observation. Just a quick question. What is the ceiling height in the retail units?
Flipping to a cross-section of the building as we speak.
Yep, thank you. I can hear the papers rustling, so I know you're doing work.
Clear inside below all the finished ceilings, 10 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Very similar to the office building that I'm in here as well.
No, that's actually good to hear. We've seen a lot of retail that's gone and they're putting in 20-foot ceilings just on spec for suspended and so forth, and it's nice to. I think that's probably more appropriate for this site and keeps the massing down.
It is appropriate for the scale here.
Great. And a question on loading zone. There's obviously a bus stop adjacent on Central, but commercial do require some loading zone, and where the trucks currently stop, as I've seen them, is really where the parking lot entrance is. So has there been some thought as to where the commercial space loading zone would actually be utilized?
For the scale of this building, there is no requirement provided for for a commercial loading zone for trucks, very similar to Delish on the other side of us, which is a high frequency delivery building, because they both have a restaurant on site and cater to meals elsewhere as well. This is a much smaller facility than that, and it is, as was noted earlier, it's a smaller square footage space. There is the potential for vehicles after hours and during hours to quickly drop off goods and services here. They're not permitted generally to use the bus parking facilities, and those spaces are off limit to commercial trucks for deliveries.
Understood.
So they would use typically perhaps the St. Patrick Street frontage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardcastle. That answers it. And I guess I'll just leave my only other comment on this was, or actually two. One, in the interest of e-bikes, I'm hoping that the e-bikes have room for different design styles and so forth, because oftentimes if these are car replacements, they often need to have built-in storage and transportation mechanisms, so people running to the store have the ability to transport those. But that often requires sort of specialized spacing wider than a typical bicycle. So I'm just throwing that in there as for thought. And I guess the last question I have for you is on the parking. I struggle with the 4. I will admit. It's a very significant decrease, less than 1 per unit, and I know certainly we'll hear from some people on that. So can you just very quickly just lay out to me all of the permutations of parking that you've considered for this space? Looking at that square of land that's at the back of the building, are there any other mechanisms there that have been considered and put away as for adding additional parking spaces?
There's no additional parking spaces available on the site, and when we were designing the building, we had the benefit of both having a traffic analysis, a parking assessment done in the community, and as you start to configure the number of units and the physical area of the commercial spaces, and designing a building so that what are the permutations of the functional requirements of the building that were generating those numbers, and then separate to that, how could you accommodate those numbers? The building site does not contain sufficient area for a ramp to descend. A descending ramp will take out all the potential parking spaces, so you would have a ramp going to a parking facility for no more than, let's say, 2 cars. So it's much more efficient having them as surface parking. It's much more efficient to have them arranged the way we have, and then the cars are also away from the residential neighbors by having the cars inboard and the traffic lane outboard. It means that the traffic lane is actually the quieter of the two and away from the sound of cars starting and stopping and doors opening and closing and the like. We did try to configure the site in a number of different ways. The parking count, the maximum parking count we achieved was 4 stalls. We could have developed the building in a different way. We could have had on the 2nd floor 3 2-story residences, and we would have saved the money on the elevator and the stairs and the parking that was being generated. But you wouldn't actually accommodate as many rental properties, which are highly sought after in this community. So going with a decision for 6 units, tracking that with the parking assessment consultant to make sure that as we were doing so, what did we have to do to mitigate the use of his parking demand study saying 10 cars, and then his assessment of what were logical ways of bringing that down.
So Mr. Hardcastle, I'm just going to interrupt you. I think that's laid out in the parking studies. My question was really around the physical layout, and I have to be mindful of the time. We spent a lot of time on this already. I just want to make sure that we have a chance for other questions, follow up, and to pieces. So I'm going to go to second time speakers at this point. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. And I do have one question for district staff, and that is for the concessions of the reduced parking and the increased density of the floor space on the third floor, was there any offer or request for a community amenity contribution?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. As you may be aware, this application initially came forward last year prior to my time working here at Oak Bay. So I'd have to look into that and ask some of my colleagues if that was the case at that time.
Thank you very much. But just for my clarification on that question, where there is a variance and not a rezoning, do CACs typically kick in?
No, we wouldn't have anything, I guess, in place within our regulations at our time in which we could ask for that. Clarify.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Patterson? Councillor Green?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly add, at the meeting last year, after the ADP meeting formally ended, I approached the developer, and because of the historical significance of Casey's in that corner, one of the amenities that I suggested to him, and this was very informal, but that was a plaque commemorating the site and acknowledging the site and Casey's store, because it is really a famous location, well known, and had been very well attended for years and years and years. So that was one of the amenities I requested, but again, informally.
Thank you for that. Is there any other questions of the applicant? Oh, Councillor Zelka, thank you.
Here we go. All right. Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. A question through you to the applicant relating to bicycles. I see on the second floor is storage for commuter bicycles, and what appears to be in the basement, the storage for cargo bikes. If the proponent could just indicate, how do these bikes get to ground level? Is it assumed for the elevator or the stairs?
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Yes, there are 2 bike rooms provided in the facility. Thank you for pointing out that the bicycle room on the lower floor is actually designated as being able to serve the requirements of tandem bicycles, the over-length cargo bicycles. Some of these have difficulty going in standard elevators. There is an elevator that we have provided in this building that will adequately serve some of those requirements, not perhaps the most longest of those cargo bikes, but many of the cargo bikes will fit in the elevators that we have here, because the building code itself is dictating that this elevator is exactly the same size as an elevator that would be serving 100 units.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, so then the assumption is that if it doesn't fit the elevator, it'll be the stairs.
It'll be the stairs.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I don't see other hands up at this time. Just before we get to any motions here, can I just get one clarification, maybe from Mr. Weber or from staff, on this is a DVP process, a variance process. So that bylaw, I think, it's a fairly short notification area in terms of 50 meters or 100 meters, something of that nature. Is there a mechanism here by which is that what we follow it by the bylaw, or is it, this is a more significant variance than we would typically see in terms of community interests, I would say?
Your worship.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, I'm just
sorry.
oh, it's okay, Mr. Weber. I'm gonna go to Ms. Rella in the room here first, and then.
Your worship, that notification radius is established by bylaw.
Okay. And if council wishes to see that go out a little wider, is that feasible, or is it just entirely by the bylaw piece?
It will be by bylaw, your worship.
Okay, so we may just, in terms of making the public aware, I think there may be some other mechanisms we can do that, just I think there's some broader public interest. We can certainly take input from anywhere in the community on this. Thank you for that clarification. So back to this table, are there motions? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I will move receipt of the staff report.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on receipt? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton. I saw your microphone still on,
Thank
so I
you,
waited.
Your Worship. Yeah, sorry, just wanted to make sure I got to make sure I get the language right. I will move that council direct that notice be given of council's consideration of DVP 00115.
Moved and seconded, and this is for notification to the public. So we have a motion live on the floor then. So discussion, I'll go to Councillor Appleton first. You made the motion. Anything you want to add?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm encouraged to hear the conversation around the table. I think there's a lot to like about this proposal. I think it's eminently supportable to go out to the community to get their feedback, and when that feedback's received back at the council table, I look forward to debating next steps. So, but I do feel it's eminently supportable at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Mr. Hardcastle, for answering all of our questions, some of them harder than others. I'm excited about the opportunity or the possibility of increasing our rental units in the municipality. However, for me at this time, I don't think I can support this motion because I don't think this is the right proposal for this corner. I think that I would like to see something a little bit not as high here and with a little bit more parking availability. I also think that there was a lot of talk about, and in the proposal and tonight, about the viability of the property. And again, I just want to stress that to me, the proponent made the investment in full knowledge of what our zoning restrictions were. So that's in their business plan and their responsibility. And it's not the responsibility of the municipality to help people help people to make something viable when they have made that decision to do so. It's our responsibility to help people through the process to make sure it's legitimate, but we shouldn't be responsible for an inadequate business plan, and I think that perhaps in this case it might have been it might have been just that. And so I would like to see the rentals come back to council, but in a different, in a little bit of a different building than what you've proposed. Again, I think the building's beautiful. I really think this corner needs something. I'm just not sure that I can support something at this height, and I'd like to see something come back in a different format. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Green.
Thank you. Excuse me, and I will be supporting the motion as presented. And one of the reasons I will be supporting the motion, first, I do, and I agree with Councillor Appleton. We have a great need in this community for rental housing, and not rental housing that will be used as holiday housing. That is an issue for many communities, and it's certainly an issue in Oak Bay. And I was present during the full discussion from the advisory design, during the advisory design panel deliberations, and they were pretty positive about this particular proposal. One of the things to note is that on the kitty corner across, so that would be the southwest corner, I think I'm correct, or anyways, certainly kitty corner, there is an apartment building, multi-unit apartment building that is at least, I believe, 3 stories. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but so in essence, in terms of a fit with the neighborhood, it does fit with the neighborhood around it, and it does provide, again, other living options and new commercial revitalization. There isn't, it's been, since Casey's closed as a grocery store, it's really been hit and miss with a number of little businesses trying to make a go of it there. And I think it's probably a tough go, but I think this will be a revitalization economically for that little neighborhood. I think they call them nodes or hubs. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Ney. Just for the record, the apartment across the way is actually only basically 1.5 or 2 stories. It's not 3 stories. Thank you.
No,
go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting the motion. I'd like to see this go to the public. I like conceptually what we've got so far. I like I like how it's very sympathetic to my eye with the neighboring community. I think there are trade-offs here, but it really does help contribute, and it's very consistent with our sort of complete community concept where people can live, work, and socialize all in the same neighborhood. So I'll be very interested to hear what the community has to say with this project at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Any other discussion? Not seeing any hands popping up, so I'm just going to make one quick comment here. I have to say I'm still concerned about the parking. I think that it has a potential, especially if this whole area is ultimately built up more. We're going to have to look at parking in this area in some way, shape, or form. And so I think throwing, not paying attention to that at this stage is wrong. But I also feel, recognize that there's a lot of constraints on this particular site and that there's trade-offs to things. I certainly see that the merit of adding some rental space, revitalizing the retail space. I think I'm really heartened just by the height and the size and the flexibility of the retail space, that it's been really well thought through. So a lot of my initial concerns have been ameliorated. Parking, not entirely, but I'm certainly supportive of this going out to the public at this point to hear what they have to say and to hear if there's any additional comments. So I'll be supporting the motion to move it forward for public input. So is there any other discussion here? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor Braithwaite opposed. Thank you very much. That carries. So that will go out for notification to come back to council in future. Mr. Hardcastle, I just want to express my appreciation for you coming tonight. It's a long evening of questions put to you, and I'm sure you'll be back to join us again when this comes back. So have a good evening.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 8.1, we have temporary sidewalks in Oak Bay. We have Mr. Rennick, our Manager of Engineering Services, joining us. This is a report that came to council at an earlier meeting. We were running low on time, and so we deferred it to this meeting. So it's back here at this point for us to go through. Mr. Rennick, welcome back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Would you like me to go ahead with my introduction?
Yeah, well, please just do a short introduction. I think we've all had a chance to read the report, but for the benefit of the public in particular, just to give a quick overview of what's contained in here and the recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here to speak with you tonight about the temporary sidewalks, in particular the ones along Oak Bay Avenue and on Crescent Road. The temporary sidewalks on Oak Bay Avenue were introduced by the Emergency Operations Center, and to date, Council has not had an opportunity to provide direction on those particular sidewalks. In the early part of 2020, Oak Bay staff were contemplating a new approach to exploring new transportation ideas, namely looking at putting temporary measures in place for things like crosswalks or curb bump outs or traffic calming, with the idea of testing out design ideas and seeking input from the community about the feasibility of potential changes. Since more permanent work involves investing significant time and cost for design and construction, our idea was basically that we could test out concepts and that they would better inform our options for transportation safety improvements. So when the Emergency Operations Center started exploring options to create more space for social distancing for residents on foot or for folks with strollers or using walkers, etc., staff was able to use these temporary measures to assist with the COVID-19 social distancing challenge, but we also were able to use them to test out some changes to street design. So that's kind of the Oak Bay Avenue story. And then the Crescent Road temporary sidewalk, that one was directed by council earlier this year. And at the time, council had directed that it be maintained until December 31st of 2021, unless alternative direction was provided. So as it's said in the report, staff's recommendation is that we maintain the temporary sidewalks on Oak Bay Avenue and eliminate the one on Crescent Road. I hope that was a quick enough summary, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Rennick. And my apologies, I don't want to constrain your time here, but if there's anything that's a gap in coverage, we'll get to it through the questions. I have Councillor Braithwaite and then Patterson. to start.
Thanks so much, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Rennick. Mr. Rennick, I noticed in your report that you talked about negative impact the driving behaviors have been noted on the Crescent Road site. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Council. We did receive some emails about what's going on down there in terms of seeing folks doing, U-turns so that they can park on the other side of the street. We've heard about cyclists who were treating that widened sidewalk as though it was a bike lane. And then we were also hearing about drivers honking at cyclists as though to say that they think the widened sidewalk is a bike lane and that the cyclists should be using it. It is a very narrow road corridor, and it already had some challenges prior to putting in that sidewalk. And our observation was just that we did not solve the problem with this temporary sidewalk. It didn't have a good impact on driver behaviors.
Just to follow with that, I know we had a couple of letters come in that were in support of leaving that there. And one of the letters actually suggested that if however it had to be removed, that they would suggest that signage or a yellow line at the curb be considered to direct parking to the north side of the street where there is no sidewalk. Is that something that could be considered if this happens to go ahead tonight?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, to Council, we could absolutely consider adding no parking, and under the Streets and Traffic Bylaw, that's something that can either be ordered by Council or can be enacted by the Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have Councillor Patterson next.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your report, Mr. Rennick. Question just on a couple of items, a follow-up on the Crescent Road that Councillor Braithwaite just spoke about. Although I'm not certain that bad behavior on part of drivers is justification for denying improved pedestrian thoroughfare. But in the letters, it also did mention that there was vegetation in adjacent properties that limited the sidewalk space to a further degree. I'm wondering if any action has or will be taken to, in fact, deal with overgrowths of vegetation in the area.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. This was also discussed back in March when the original report was brought. Several councillors did raise that there is existing vegetation. And at the time, I had asked the Parks Department to send letters to those residences asking them to prune their vegetation, but I could not comment whether action has been taken. And if council would like us to, we can certainly send another round of those letters to those residences.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you for that information. And I really think it warrants us taking any action we can to try and improve the sidewalk for pedestrians in that area. So hopefully staff will go forward with that. The other question I have is just about the sidewalk widening on Oak Bay Avenue and the bollards that have been placed there. And I think they're quite welcomed by most users of Oak Bay Avenue, so I think they have worked quite well. But the report does state that the bollards will be replaced with concrete planting boxes or similar structures. What is a similar structure to a concrete planting box?
Sure, thank you. Mr. Rennick?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. There is a temporary Rhode Island structure that City of Victoria uses, and I don't have the technical name for it, but their manager of transportation planning likes to refer to them as road puppies, and for some reason I find that really funny. They are small, yellow, movable traffic islands, and City of Victoria uses them in a number of locations in and around a couple of elementary schools, for example. Basically, what we were getting at with the idea of replacing the pylons is that, or the white plastic cones rather, is they look great until the first time somebody parks on top of one. And there are quite a few of them now that they're really just flopped in half because someone's driven into them. And we're suggesting that if they're going to be there through another winter, we might like to replace them with something that just looks a little bit better.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. That was the information I wanted. I wondered if that was what was meant, and so now that with the clarification, I understand completely what the description is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And just back to Councillor Patterson's comments and also Councillor Braithwaite's comments on the overgrowth of vegetation. Mr. Rennick, through the Mayor to Mr. Rennick, is it not possible for the municipality to act arbitrarily when there's a public health and safety issue, or a public safety issue in this case, regarding overgrowth of vegetation? I know that I'm aware of a couple of other incidents when the municipality has acted in the interests of public safety and gone ahead and done the trimming themselves through parks and through parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Rennick, I believe that is true that we can undertake that works if necessary. Do you have an answer?
Through you, Mayor, that is absolutely something that we do have the power to do. However, we do tend to try to go to voluntary compliance first, as opposed to using staff. And essentially, we would rather see people voluntarily comply as opposed to having to use the power of the ability to do the work ourselves and then charge the resident for it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other? Oh, sorry. Thank you. I have a Councillor Zelka who wishes to speak, and then Councillor Appleton.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
We can. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. I had to echo some of the concerns and comments from some of my councillors with respect to ensuring that this very narrow passageway for the pedestrians is made as safe as possible. I have vague memories of York Place, just north of Oak Bay Avenue, also a very narrow road where the district of Oak Bay had to step in and deal with overgrowth over a very narrow sidewalk. And so I know we do have the powers, and if we do need to enact it, I would certainly support staff moving forward in doing that to provide us even more options in this area down on Central Avenue. I am in favor. Certainly, I wanted to say that with respect to the first aspect of this motions that will be coming forward for Oak Bay Avenue, but I'm going to be asking that we'll be dividing the question when it finally comes forward, because I'm not in favor of staff's suggestion that we remove the temporary sidewalk widening along Crescent Road for at least, in my mind, for at least another year until we're well past the pandemic. For hopefully fairly obvious reasons, just because it is so difficult in this area, and frankly, we're still in the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I will be separating these out just because it's much simpler to deal with them one at a time. Still trying to focus on questions at this point, and then we'll have comments based on those motions as they come forward. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. I'd reached out to staff in advance, and this is picking up on some of what my colleagues have said. Is clearly we identified this sidewalk as being quite narrow, and I just wanted to confirm with Mr. Rennick that this is a particularly narrow sidewalk in terms of its design and in terms of its width, that it is one of the narrower sidewalks in the district, and it doesn't really provide much in the way of easy access on and off of the sidewalk in areas where it's not somebody's driveway. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Rennick, I believe you're referring to Crescent Road specifically?
On Crescent Road,
yes. Yeah, so if you could just maybe give us the actual numbers of how wide that sidewalk is compared to other sidewalks in the community?
Through you, Mayor, I do not have the exact width off the top of my head, but I can agree with the comment that Councillor Appleton made, that it is much narrower than standard. I would be surprised if it's over a meter.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton. Anything else?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, just very quickly, I guess we've implemented, obviously there was previously street parking in the area that now has the temporary sidewalk area in it. Did we encounter any understand there was some feedback from the adjacent landowners at the time that it was implemented, being concerned about parking. Did we encounter any issues with parking? Did we have any complaints or issues with illegal parking or parking issues above and beyond what you're describing as far as people driving unsafely in order to access parking on the other side of the street?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor. No, we did not see an uptick of illegal parking per se. It was more the maneuvers that they were using to get to legal parking spaces.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not so much a question, but a comment in terms of echoing what Councillor Patterson has said. I think that we have, and I totally understand the effort to make the streetscape as safe as possible. I think that we have a limited responsibility in terms of managing unsafe driver behaviors. If drivers are going to do things that are unsafe, I think that they're responsible for things that are unsafe. I think we have a responsibility to look at those aspects which make the streetscape safer for everybody. And this, to my view, the temporary sidewalk makes it more safer for those users and makes it easier for them to access other spaces in our community. So is it, Your Worship, I would ask a question, is it appropriate to, if the second portion of the staff recommendation with respect to Crescent Road is not favorable, are we seeking an amendment to say that should be extended or set aside, or do we need to vote in the negative for that and then present something separately?
So I think the simplest way of doing this is to take we'll have the motions as they're laid out, or people can make a different motion as we come to that one, and we can have a debate on that motion. So I'm happy to take it either way, but I'll just go through them one at a time and I'll seek a motion. It's often easier to use the motion as written so everybody has a clear understanding of what the motion is, but I would suggest if the thing is not to be removed, then we should just defeat that motion and take a separate motion instead, as opposed to amending. Okay, I'm just, oh, right, this does subject to public input. Thank you so much, Councillor Braithwaite. Just if I might ask staff, is there any mechanism by which we could lower the temperature in here? It is very, very warm to the point of I'm having we're all sweltering here for some reason. So thank you for that. So if there is anybody from the public who wishes to address council, you can do it through the Zoom application. Just use the raise hand option within the reactions at the bottom of the screen. You can use that, or you can hit *9 on your phone if you're calling in to raise your hand to talk to this item. So again, *9 if you're calling in to the 1-800 number, or use the raise hand number for the other aspects. But I think we'll take a motion to receive.
Move receipt.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded for receipt of the report. Any discussion? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And I understand that Councillor Ney will have to leave us after this this agenda item, so we'll take the public input first and go to the main points of the questions before we get there. So is there anybody again from the public who is interested in addressing council on this item? I have to give a bit of time here just because there's a delay between when we're speaking here and when the live stream is happening. So if people are trying to call in to the 1-800 number that's posted, that's the 1-855-703-8985 number. That is the way of going there. I am just looking at my screen here to keep a track on the attendees, and I don't see hands raised, which are by their very nature popped to the top of the screen. Again, *9 would raise you to the top of the screen. And I'm just going to go as well to just check my speaking notes in case anybody has pre-registered for this. There are not. So, Ms. Williams, I'm just going to go to you more formally and ask, is there anybody from the public who has indicated they wish to speak to this item?
No, Your Worship. There's nobody wishing to speak and nobody in the waiting room.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
So I will make the motion that the temporary sidewalk widening on Oak Bay Avenue be maintained and that the bollards be replaced with concrete planting boxes or other similar structures.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? All I would ask is that we make them attractive, and I think it will give us a good opportunity to see, what changes to that village as we go through village planning pieces. So I'm just getting updates from staff here. Yeah, go ahead. So the next item is the temporary sidewalk
You have to
widening.
call the question first.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much.
And then, a question to staff. If I made the motion in reverse of what is listed on here, would that be acceptable, or do I have to make this motion and then?
I can answer that question.
Okay.
So I'm happy for you to make, it's a very simple one way
Yeah,
or the other
okay.
question, so I think it's an easy one to move it either
So
way.
I will move that the temporary sidewalk widening on Crescent Road be maintained.
Moved and seconded, and no end date on that, just maintained. Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion on that item? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I'm obviously in support of the motion. I do want to recognize the efforts being put in by staff to evaluate the streetscape. This is a challenging area to work with, and it's been challenging to respond to the exigencies of COVID. And it's just not an easy corridor to work with. So I very much appreciate the work that staff's put into this and the staff recommendation. It's not a contradiction of staff's recommendation, more I think just moving into a different awareness of how the district allocates public space, and the streets are public space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I have Councillor Zelka, then Braithwaite.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. I will be voting in favor of maintaining this the sidewalk, and I would ask that when this finally comes before council, at some point it may, that some definitive indication of whether the offending greenery, which is impeding the pedestrian access, will somehow have been dealt with either through letter or through direct action by Oak Bay staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just note that Mr. Haran has raised his hand as well, perhaps to address anything that's been raised here. So go ahead, Mr. Haran.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to jump in to help offer just a couple pieces of information to help the discussion. The first one is it's a regular operational requirement that we do throughout the district when vegetation kind of encroaches on public property, whether it's on sidewalks and so on. And there's an escalating kind of response mechanism that we do to try to keep those things, to keep the public right of way free and let people use sidewalks freely, and also to make sure sight lines are maintained properly for at intersections and so on. So that's the first one. The second one is, I would just, as a request to council in terms of this discussion, we would be requesting from a staff perspective to have a bit further direction on this question of the Crescent Road improvements, because they are temporary in nature, which means that the process in terms of how it looks and how it's designed is not meant to factor in everything that you might want to see for that stretch of road. So we would request an end date or at least an opportunity to come back to council with a further discussion on this particular project, and then about whether to make these works permanent or whether to extend them to a specific period of time. And I just wanted to pass along also to remind council that this particular stretch fits within the greater context of a pedestrian and sidewalk master plan process, which is ongoing, which will be delivered in the new year, which will allow us to present particular issues such as Crescent Road within the greater context of other sidewalk and pedestrian issues throughout the district, in terms of widths of sidewalks, in terms of where sidewalks don't exist, where they should exist. So as we try to prioritize where to direct capital money to improve pedestrian and sidewalks throughout the district, that we can provide that advice to council from a big picture perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. I'm just wondering, given that that's due to come back to council next year, do you want a timeline basically to come back to council at the time of the pedestrian and sidewalk presentation? I guess I'm trying to think of some reasonable timeline, or by the end of 2022, or what do you think would be an appropriate wording?
Well, Your Worship, I think that with whatever resolution, if the direction is to maintain Crescent Road as it currently exists, even if it was just to say, to acknowledge that staff need to come back in 2022 for further discussion and recommendations, that will give us some flexibility to come back and time it in a way that makes sense against the pedestrian and sidewalk master plan, but it also makes it clear that council is not making a permanent decision about Crescent Road at this time.
So I have the mover nodding as a seconder, as acceptable to that as well. So to keep it in place and for staff to bring it back, the permanent options at a future date. Okay, I have nodding around the table. Thank you, Mr. Haran, for that clarification. I think we all appreciate it. Are there any other speakers who wish to speak to this? So I went to my list. I don't have any more. Thank you for that. I was actually, I really appreciate the clarification, the change of that note. I sort of felt I didn't have enough information to make that permanent change. I think there are some issues with the way it's laid out right now. And it's one of many narrow sidewalks. But I think COVID is not such a big issue on that. I know that people do have to walk close together, but we're at a point in time where there's lots of those issues that come up. So I think with that change, I'm quite happy to support it, that it'll come back within the context of the overall needs, because I think it deserves a good design, not just sort of an in perpetuity temporary resolution. So I'm appreciative of that. So anything else? Any other discussion on this item? Not seeing any, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Now, Councillor Ney, I understand that you have to leave us at this point. Is that correct? You're still muted, Councillor Ney.
Yeah, sorry. So I'll sign out now?
Sure. If you wish to exit this, I just want to make note of it in the minutes, that's all. So it's good to just have it be noted. Thank you for that. We are moving on to number 8.2. We are at 9:51 p.m., so we're going to need some motion to move us a little beyond that, but it may truncate the conversation here for tonight as well. Councillor Green?
If you don't mind, Your Worship, this report deserves a full and frank discussion, and I think it really deserves our full attention. It's significant and a significant issue for all of us. I think trying to cram it in now at 10 to 10, a discussion like that, I think it would do it some disservice. My suggestion is that we defer this item to an agenda where the agenda isn't quite as crowded and we have more space and time to talk about it, if that's agreeable.
I think it's a reasonable comment. I'm just going to, before I go, we don't have a motion yet, so no seconding. But I just want to go to Ms. Varela on this one. We have a committee of the whole coming up. I'm not sure if this is appropriate to refer it there, and I'm not sure if we want some direction before we send it to another place for conversation. But it is a large document, and we have a number of other items on the agenda that we should get to, including some land use items. So.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a significant piece of work. We could bring it back on November 15th. I was going to note as an introduction to this piece that staff, both former Deb Hopkins and Sarah Morden, are both presenting on this piece of work at the upcoming Corporate Officers Forum. So I also want to just give some kudos out to them. But I believe I'm getting the nod on November 15th as a possibility. So.
The appropriate motion then would be to refer this matter to the November 15th meeting. Is that correct, Ms. Williams?
Yes, Your Worship, that would be the correct motion. The only time-sensitive thing, of course, is depending on the direction the conversation goes, the recruitment process would likely then hit over the holidays, but that's really the only thing that we were concerned about from a timing perspective.
If I may, I think we have to move forward with it as is for the time being in terms of notification. So we have one year appointments, and we just continue that process as is, without any other direction from council. I think we have to move it forward. I think that's probably the best path forward. But sorry, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Councillor. I was just going to get a motion to refer, and then we can have a debate on that.
A point of information. I don't know if the referral motion is debatable.
Sure, go ahead. Yes, referral motions are debatable.
Are they debatable?
Yes, I believe they are, Ms. Williams.
Then I'm willing to defer as suggested by Councillor Green.
Sorry, I'm just going to confirm that my recollection of Robert's rules is correct. We can debate referral motions, is that correct?
You're right, Your Worship. I believe the one you were thinking of was the a motion to.
Doesn't matter. We can
Sorry,
we can debate
it
this
can
one.
interrupt a motion on the table. My brain's a little mushy
Yeah.
right now. It can interrupt a motion on the table. That's what makes it special, but it's not debatable. Or it is debatable, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to refer to the November 15th, moved and seconded. That motion to refer is now on the table, but I think you've made your point, Councillor Green. Councillor Zelka, you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you very much. I see on today's agenda for this item, it is open to public input. I'm pleased to see 8.2 on the agenda. I presume for the November 15th, that's a council meeting, and this item would also be open for public input.
That is correct, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion to refer? I'm not seeing any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you, Councillor Green, for that. I think it moves us along appropriately into the agenda. With that, I still want a motion to extend the meeting to 10:30. If I may.
Motion
make
to
that motion.
extend. Yeah.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to confirm November the 15th is a committee of the whole, which of course has full public input.
Okay.
Just so that we weren't calling a special council meeting on the same day.
Fantastic. Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
clarification. That does, thinking of the wording of the motion, it still fits, so we're still in good order there. So thank you for that clarification. Moving on to item number 8.3, we have Mr. Payne, our Director of Financial Services, presenting his third quarter budget report. And of course, a more final report will be coming as part of the budget and strategic planning initiatives in November. But this is Q3. Mr. Payne, I can't say there's anything but positive news in this report, but welcome to our meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a sound check. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you clearly. Yes. Welcome, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll try to be brief, so there's time for questions if there are any. As part of our suite of transparency improvements to our financial reporting, over the last 2 years, staff prepare a Q2 and a Q3 budget report. And these reports contain year-to-date values as well as full year forecasts for all operating budgets, capital projects, and special projects. Council may recall in July of 2020 that Council approved amendments to the sustainable procurement policy, which provided additional transparency around purchasing activities. In particular, Council requested that disclosures be made for single payments exceeding $25,000 and or contracts that were signed of whose values exceed $25,000. So these have been reported for the period July 1 through September 30th in the Q3 budget report in Schedule G and H. This process demonstrates a high standard for transparency in local government finance. It's earned commendations from our auditors and is above the norm in transparency. The forecasted results documented in the Q3 budget report are positive from a financial perspective. The district is forecasting a $2.2 million budget surplus, which is detailed in Schedule B. Some of the highlights of these surplus include an additional $350,000 grant, or more specifically, a reserve refund from the CRD trunk sewer, which has been transferred to reserve per council's direction. The district also received an extra $817,000 in gas tax transfer this year. That was greater than budget. That was recently announced from the federal government, and that's been transferred to our infrastructure renewal reserve as well, in line with our policy. There are a number of operating budgets which have over $200,000 in net surplus, including corporate admin, the police department, building and planning, and the sewer and water utility operating budgets. The majority of these surpluses are due to staff vacancies that have since been filled, meaning that such surpluses shouldn't continue to happen to the same degree. Happy to report that Parks, Rec, and Culture revenues are forecasted to be approximately $1.1 million higher than what the budget had forecasted originally. Council will recall that we had budgeted to use $2.6 million of the COVID-19 Restart Grant to help support operations at the Parks, Rec, and Culture during the pandemic. Well, because of this revenue surplus, we will not have to use $1.1 million of it. So we'll only have to use $1.5 million of the COVID Restart Grant. And that would leave our COVID-19 Restart Grant balance over $2 million for potential use in 2022. Our capital expenditures are forecasted to end the year at about 48% of budget, which is about $10.1 million of the $21.1 million. If you're asking why, what's the $11 million in underspending? The majority of it is $5.4 million from the Upland Sewer Separation Project, which won't proceed since the grant was declined from the province and the federal government. And there's also $3.3 million in fire truck purchases, which will likely occur in 2022 or shortly thereafter. So those capital budgets are deferred. So without these items, our capital spending is actually at over 80% of the budget, which is good news. Last year, we acquired approximately $5.9 million in assets. So this year's forecast of $10.1 million spending is actually a 71% increase in capital spending and another record-breaking year. Some of the capital budget successes included in the report are underspending in the development tracker budget by $25,000, underspending in the fire department and emergency generator by $38,000. We had a good result on the tender there. Underspending in the municipal hall capital budget, which was also on time and on budget, by $86,000. Underspending in the public works vehicle replacement budget by $80,000. And we also had a good result in the Oak Bay Rec Center transformer replacement, which is forecast to be under budget by $60,000. So those surpluses will be returned to the reserve, which funded those projects, unless directed otherwise by council. So that concludes the brief Q3 presentation, financial presentation, available for any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. I have questions here. Councillor Braithwaite and Patterson.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne, for that. It's always nice when there's kind of good news. I have a question in regards to the COVID Restart Grant. So since we're not using, I think you said $1.1 million this year, and which means that we have about $2 million left. And since we aren't using it for what we originally thought, can we use it for anything else in particular? And if we don't use it, do we have to give it back?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, there's a few options in regards to the use of the COVID-19 Restart Grant. One of the major options that it could be used for was to support revenue losses that were a result of the pandemic. Other expenditures included capital expenditures required to make your business pandemic proof, such as shielding and what have you. So there actually is quite a wide list of eligible expenditures, which is why accounting standards required us to recognize it as a grant in the year which we received it, which was last year. Keep in mind, Council, I believe, has indicated that that grant would support any operating revenue decreases in 2022 as well, because we still haven't returned to pre-pandemic revenue levels. So staff recommendation will be to continue using that grant until the net Parks, Rec and Culture budget returns to pre-pandemic levels. Otherwise, we will require a tax increase to maintain the same existing service levels. And the third option really is if we find ourselves in a situation where that grant is no longer needed to support Parks, Rec and Culture operations, the province will allow us to retroactively allocate those funds to expenditures that have already occurred, thus ensuring that the funds don't have to be returned. Now, the province and federal government jointly provided this grant. Neither have indicated that they intend on clawing it back in any such way. However, it's not completely impossible that would happen. So it may be something that we wish to consider in the future.
Thank you.
I guess my question would be, would widening a sidewalk because of COVID fall into this?
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, I believe that expenditure would likely qualify for that. So I believe the answer is yes. I'd have to confirm, but that's my instinct right now.
Thank you. I think that was just related to the previous item that we were dealing with. I have Councillor Patterson and then Appleton.
Thank you. I did enjoy that, though. I thought it was a little bit of creative budgeting on the fly, so it was good. Thank you for this report, Mr. Payne. And yes, it is primarily a good news story. One of the items that, of course, you have highlighted as being a major variance to the budget originally, and that is the grant that was not received for the upland sewer separation, and then, of course, that affects the capital projects too. Could you remind me when that will be then coming back to council for further discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, it's a question best answered by my colleague, Dan Horan, who's on the line. I'll also note that recently the grants team has opened up for the environmental quality program as well, which was the program that we applied under in the first place. So it's an opportunity to try our luck again with the province. But I'll ask Director Horan to add additional comments in terms of the actual project deliverable.
Thank you very much. It is good news that stream is open again. Mr. Horan, welcome back.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I think there's a short-term answer, and then there's a longer-term answer. And the short-term answer is Council's direction on the upland sewer separation and how to accomplish that is quite clear, and I think remains in force. Meaning the district is really depending on grants from higher levels of government, federal and provincial levels of government, to help support that project. It is significant in nature. It's the latest estimates that we used for the application was approximately $21 million for the whole thing. So, and that's still the case. So that's why we're still aiming for applications for further grant opportunities, including the new intake that just opened up. But then council will see a report on that and shortly as we prepare for that grant application. The longer term question will come. It will take some time before we start looking at how the grant applications going forward, and then how it fits in the bigger picture. So thankfully we have the ability going forward, which we didn't have in the past, to look at questions like this in a bigger perspective, because we'll have sewer master plans completed. We'll have for both sewer and sanitary sewer and storm sewer. We'll have the master plans for water, and then a lot of those bigger picture, what does the full capital program look like for things like facilities, as well as it all comes together in the next 2 or 3 years. We'll be able to really make some better recommendations and have some really good, frank discussions with council about priorities and strategy moving forward on this issue, as well as the other infrastructure issues that we're facing.
Thank you, Mr. Wren. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you for that information. In the report, we referred to record-breaking spending in 2021 for the capital projects, and indeed it is record-breaking compared to previous years where it was really underspent. But if I look at the forecast total for the storm, sanitary, sewers, and water and pavement, it's about $4.1 million, and yet the financial plan for 2021, and in fact our sustainable funding model, shows a necessary $5.7 million annually. So I'm just wondering if our Director of Finances would like to comment on how these numbers correlate.
Sure, thank you. And I'll give it to, do you prefer to have it for Mr. Payne or for Mr. Horan?
Yes, Your Worship. Happy to comment, and I also know that my colleague will want to comment on that as well. Council may recall when the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan was presented in September, one of the recommendations that Council, one of the motions that Council passed was to ask staff to return in Q1 of 2022 to report on how we can really scale up to live up to our responsibilities in escalating our capital replacement around those linear assets. And so right now it's really about capacity building. So I think it's fair to acknowledge that the pace at which we're replacing those assets need to increase substantially Certainly, we weren't able to complete that in this financial plan phase, but we'll be looking to scale that up rapidly over the next 5-year financial plan. And as mentioned, I believe Director Haran will have more to say about that.
Sure. Anything else to add, Mr. Haran?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I think if Council recall, we also spoke about this at length in the June 2021 Asset Management Program update, where we went through the capital program and then had a discussion on what that program means and what it looks like for the future. So I think the key there is being that we've ramped up our capital program in the last several years, including taking on some innovative ways, at least for Oak Bay, in terms of maximizing our use of consultant support. We've grown our team a little bit in terms of full-time equivalents, and we've also done things like maximizing our use of contractors in terms of construction activity as well. And what we've shown in the last 2 years is that Oak Bay's forces here, our team is stretched to the limit in terms of what we can deliver. So the financial plan this year was based on trying to stretch our ability in terms of our stretch goals, and we actually accomplished quite a bit, but there are still some undone activities happening this year that we'd hoped to achieve, but have to defer them till next year, which is a clear signal that we have to grow our capacity to be able to deliver on our capital program. And I don't have not able to provide a specific example that you can hold me to, but it's at least what we're thinking is 3 to 5 times our level of output in terms of capital program. And that's part of what Mr. Payne was referring to. I need to come back to you, the council and the community, to talk more specifically about what those things look like and how we're meant to achieve it. But I think it's clear that we do need to grow, and we do need to overcome some challenges that not a lot of municipalities have had to achieve yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Councillor Patterson, anything else?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate those comments. I think that it's great that we're finally managing to perhaps not achieve as much as we would have hoped, but achieve a much greater extent of work than has taken place in the past. A couple of clarifications for me. On Schedule A, it says down under sewer and water, there's variances there, considerable variances, and the explanation is crews utilized in capital and cost recovery. I don't understand what that means, so perhaps a clarification on what exactly that is telling me.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne? I know Mr. Haran can answer this as well. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. A good question that comes up often, and so it's always a good opportunity to explain what I'm saying in that succinct sentence there. Basically, for our public works crew, we have a finite FTE count of staff, and our sewer, water, utility, and our public works operating budget funds that labor, funds those FTEs. And they're expected to carry out a number of services using that funding, whether it be utility or tax funding. When those crews and their work are diverted to cost recovery projects, so say a sewer connection where a homeowner pays the full cost of that connection, or where their work is diverted for capital projects, so the replacement of drainage in our capital budget. They're not getting the work done in the operating budget. And so the funding that was set aside to pay for that generates a surplus. And that's what's happened here. And again, it really comes back to capacity building. Our public works crew, as I've mentioned, has been finite, with the exception of the increase in FTEs over the last couple of years from council. And so they're able to get that finite amount of work done. Despite the fact that the council has increased funding in other areas, such as the capital budget. So yeah, that's how I would explain that. And again, Director Haran more than likely has comments to expand on that.
I'll leave it for now, unless Councillor Patterson wishes some additional comments. So no, that's satisfactory. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, and one last comment on Schedule D. It refers to the HR training program being deferred because of the a vacancy. And I do think that, of course, the HR program is very critical to the well-being of the district. And so I'm just wondering if a member of staff could comment on where we stand on that now.
Sure, thank you. I'm not sure Ms. Donnelly's available, so I'll go to Ms. Varela to give perhaps a little brief overview.
Certainly, Your Worship. So staff has notified council, of course, that the HR department's focus has been mainly pandemic over the extended period we've just been through. Certainly, we have had some successes, such as onboarding an occupational health and safety officer, getting some admin support for that department, things like that. So Ms. Donnelly will be here at strategic planning to talk about her realigned work plan and hopes for next year.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that information. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. And I apologize. Normally, I would sort of give staff a bit more of a heads up, but this question occurred to me while we were talking about the COVID Restart Grant, and I don't want to put Director Payne on the spot, but Director Payne mentioned that there was the possibility of potentially using some of the COVID Restart grants with the understanding that there's to cover revenue shortfalls. But if we continue to do well on the revenue side and potentially have surplus funds in terms of adapting to produce protections for COVID or those types of things, I'm just wondering whether or not we have outstanding work to do at any of the parks and rec facilities in terms of putting in place physical measures, or whether there's resources needed to adapt those buildings. And that may not have actually come up, or that may not have been discussed, so I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I'm just wondering whether it might be something that we could get an update on going into strategic planning or something of that nature.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I think probably a comment for Public Parks and Rec when they come back on that. But Mr. Payne, I think the short answer is yes, right? We can use those funds for that sort of work.
Yes, Your Worship, and the Parks, Rec, and Culture Department has been very proactive in adjusting to the pandemic. Quite frankly, probably one of the most proactive departments, and some of those measures are certainly considered. So an excellent point, excellent question that we'll bring back to the Parks and Rec department.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just one final thing, which is not a question, but actually a comment, but because it's come up a couple of times already through our updates, and I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity while we're talking about funding and just where we're at for funding expenditures for this year to point out I want to just sort of state in the public forum my disappointment that we weren't successful in securing the grant for the upland sewer separation. Mostly because I know how much work staff have put into preparing for it. And I think that council and the district as a whole have put a lot of time and effort into setting aside the resources and to planning to do the work. So in terms of large-scale capital projects, as Director Horan mentioned, $21 million worth of value, I would certainly like to be able to see that project happening in our community, just in terms of its scope and scale. So I'll just sort of express my disappointment that grant hasn't been made available to us, and certainly hope that it is made available in short order, reflective of the work that our staff have done to get us ready to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton, and I appreciate the staff putting up the call for public input on the screen for a while now. But I will say verbally, if anybody wishes to address council on this item that's on the agenda, you're welcome to do so. You can, again, through the app, raise your hand under the reactions tab, or just hit *9 if you're calling into the meeting. Any other questions of staff on this item? I don't see that. I think it's just, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I guess this would because priorities affect money so directly, I guess this would be through you to an appropriate staff member. I'm just checking the schedule of when we have our upcoming meetings over the next 2 or 3 months. And I understand we normally have our priorities meetings coming up before Christmas, but I don't see them scheduled anywhere. Is there any public indication yet of when our priorities and planning meetings will be held, please?
Sure. I'll go to staff on that. If I don't mind, I have to run out and just grab a power adapter for my laptop, which is about to die. So I'm going to hand it, if you don't mind, Councillor Appleton. You can take over the chairing duties as acting mayor at the moment, and then I will be back within a minute.
Absolutely. Thank you, Your Worship. So we are still awaiting confirmation of public input. Or, sorry, Ms. Varela.
Yeah, so I think we're just going to Ms. Varela first.
Thank you. Strategic planning is the first session is scheduled for November 22nd. Notification will be as per usual protocols through social media, things like that. I believe we're targeting an ad in the paper as well if council wants additional advertisement. Again, that is the first step. Strategic planning leads into budgeting, so you have a significant number of meetings coming up, but November 22nd is targeted for the first meeting.
If I may, Chair, just a follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much. So November 22nd is also scheduled to be a council meeting. Does that mean there'll be 2 separate meetings on that day, or will this all be folded into the council meeting?
Sorry, go ahead, Ms. Varela.
Thank you. So it is held as part of the council meeting at this time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Green.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Ms. Varela. If I recall correctly, November 22nd is also secondary suites, is it not? Is that correct, or am I wrong about that? Sorry, that was the date I recalled, but I could be mistaken.
Ms. Varela?
I believe we had put that to a standalone meeting on November 9th. I apologize. We had talked about that at the last meeting, and we had to confirm consultant availability. So I believe we've planned to bring that back to council November 9th.
Thanks, and I'm back.
Oh,
Thank you,
thank
Councillor
you.
Appleton, for
Thank
taking
you.
over. Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Zelka? No, we're good? Okay, I can see you there.
All good. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So it's not fair to Councillor Appleton, I have to say, because I brought up the people on screen here so I can see you. Not available to Councillor Appleton. Thank you so much for filling in there. My computer's happy now to be plugged in. Any other discussion on this item? So the appropriate motion is just for receipt.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll just make a very brief comment that thank you, Mr. Payne, for this. I think it's extremely helpful to have financial information in progress through the year. It allows us to turn our mind as we go into strategic planning and other issues to understand the financial state that we're in. In this case, we have a surplus because of the capital pieces, but in other years, of course, we may be running into severe financial issues and may having to deal with that as a council. So it's really important for us to have this sort of transparency as we go forward. So thank you for that. I still wanted, before I call the question, I just want to also make sure there's no other people raising hands. I don't have anybody on my screen. Ms. Williams, has anybody from the public indicated they wish to speak on this item?
No, Your Worship, not at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. This is so much easier when everybody's in the room together. Moving on to item, I'll call the question, sorry. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you. That carries. Moving on, we have item number 8.4. Mr. Chief Hughes, our renewal of the University of Victoria Confined Space Rescue Agreement. I think the report is fairly self-explanatory, Chief Hughes. Not to cut you off, but if you want to give a quick overview, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Yes, it's fairly self-explanatory. This is an agreement that we've had in place since 2011. It allows the district receives a $2,500 fee per year to help supplement our confined space team. and also it has provisions for cost recovery, and Oak Bay fire departments and Salish fire departments that were in partnership with this together already can have confined space teams in place for our municipal crews, so it's a value-added agreement.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Green.
If it's all right with everyone, I'm prepared to move the recommendation.
Second.
Received and that it be renewed.
And thank you very much, Chief Hughes.
Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I just have one question, Chief Hughes. Has this fee changed within the last few years, or has it been consistent? And if it's been consistent, do we know how many years it's been consistent for?
Mr. Hughes, Chief Hughes.
Through you, Chair. Yes, it has. The last agreement, it was the same amount, and I have had conversations with our partners at Salish. At this time, the fee structure does continue to cover the costs for our backfilling, but when at the end of this contract, we will certainly be looking at revising those fees.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions of Chief Hughes? This is also open for public input, so I do have to make a call for the public. If anybody wishes to address council on this item, please do so now. Again, *9 to raise your hand if you're calling in, or raise your hand through the app using the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom call screen. I'm not anticipating a large volume of public input on this item, but I do have to give the opportunity for people to call in. I don't see any hands raised. I'm going to go ahead and call the question, Ms. Williams, if you don't have any public indicating they wish to speak. You don't, okay. So I'm just going to call the question. If for some reason somebody calls in late, I'm happy to go back and hear from them. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. We are moving on to item number 9.1. We are on to land use items here. So we have item 3040 Beach Drive, and we have Mr. Weber back to join us on a simpler ask than the previous session that we spent time on. Welcome back. Welcome back, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of an upland siting and design application to undertake renovations to an existing single-family home located at 3040 Beach Drive. Staff have reviewed the proposal in context with the relevant official committee plan policies and the overall site design, and consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. The subject property is located on the west side of Beach Drive, on the southwest corner of the intersection of Beach Drive and Valdez Place, and it is approximately 2,228 meters squared in area, surrounded by single-family homes on all sides, and has an RS2 one-family residential use zoning designation and Uplands OZP designation. The proposal involves removing the existing mansard roof surrounding the deck on the east side of the residence and replacing it with a glass railing, constructing a new 29.7 meter squared single-story addition and rooftop deck with glass railing on the south corner of the first story of the residence, expanding an existing rooftop deck, constructing a new 41 meter squared above grade patio covered in a metal pergola with louvered roof on the west side of the first story of the residence, and constructing a new 11.1 meter squared single-story accessory building spanning both the rear and west interior side yards. No variances are being requested as part of this proposal, and no protected trees are proposed to be removed or new trees planted, as the existing canopy cover already exceeds the 45% required canopy coverage target for the zone by 2%. The application was reviewed at the October 5th advisory design panel meeting, and the panel noted that the proposal improves the architecture and functionality of the home and does not significantly impact the neighborhood. And the panel ultimately recommended that council consider the approval of the upland siting design application as presented. As the subject property is within an area designated as the uplands within the official committee plan, staff further reviewed the proposal for conformance with the upland siting and design guidelines. Staff determined that the proposal is not anticipated to significantly impact views or shadowing of neighboring properties or create overlook and privacy issues, largely due to the existing mature landscaping surrounding the property. Furthermore, the proposed alterations to the siting design of the existing residence is to largely remain, the proposed alterations to the siting and design of the existing residence largely keeps it within the existing footprint and is not anticipated to have a significant impact on the character of the neighborhood or the maintenance of its established park-like setting. Therefore, staff consider the proposal not to be supportable. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and I believe the applicant, David Yamamoto, is in attendance tonight to speak to the application as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask for a quick motion here to extend. We do really should get through these land use items. So move to extend to 11 at the latest. Okay. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. That allows us to continue and welcome. And I'm not going to ask you to speak, Mr. Yamamoto. I think if there's questions, I will direct them to you as necessary. I'll turn to council at this point. Are there any questions of the applicant or of staff on this application?
No, I'm happy to make a motion to whatever I'm supposed to be doing here.
It's a motion to receive and to approve.
And then to be to that this be Upland Siting and Design Application ADP 00140 to undertake renovations at 3040 Beach Drive be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any, we're open for discussion at this point. Go ahead, Councillor.
Just one thing, I just wanted to say thank you very much to the proponents for renovating rather than ripping down. And I really appreciate the thought that went into this reno.
Thank you. Councillor Green?
Yes, just very quickly, the ADP was also impressed with both the design and the project.
Thank you very much. I don't see other comments at the table here, so I think, Mr. Yamamoto, you can take it as a good sign and as a compliment to the work undertaken to make it appropriate to the site. So thank you for attending this evening and being ready to answer questions. I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you, Mr. Yamamoto. Thank you for your patience as you waited through the evening.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Yes, you too. Appreciate that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Moving on, we move to 3005 Devon Road. Again, welcome back, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thanks again, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of an upland siting and design application and development variance permit application to undertake renovations to an existing single-family home located at 3005 Devon Road. Staff have reviewed the proposal in contact with the relevant official community plan policies and the overall site design and consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. The subject property is located on the east side of Devon Road at the end of the cul-de-sac. It is approximately 1,085 meters squared in area surrounded by single family homes on all sides and has an RS2 one family residential use zoning designation and Uplands OCP designation. The proposal involves recladding the residence with both stucco and horizontal cedar siding, enclosing an existing carport and constructing an addition behind it, as well as expanding the deck above, altering the fenestration, including a new front entranceway and adding and removing windows, removing an existing greenhouse attached to the rear of the residence and constructing a below-grade patio in this location, and constructing a new accessory building in the rear yard. To construct the addition to the rear of the attached garage is proposed 2 variances to the zoning bylaw are required. A relaxation of the required minimum interior side lot line setback from 4.57 meters to 2.80 meters from the north side lot line, and a relaxation of the minimum total side lot line setback from 12.19 meters to 6.94 meters for the south and north side lot lines. These variance requests result from the applicant's wish to construct a proposed addition directly behind the existing garage, and the existing garage having a legal non-conforming setback, as previously mentioned. While the degree of nonconformity with the existing setback will not be increased, the variances are required for the additional floor area being built within the minimum required setback areas. No protected trees are proposed to be removed as part of the proposed works, and a total of 6 new trees are to be planted on site, including Gary oaks, dogwoods, and Japanese maples. The resulting estimated canopy coverage is 45% of the lot area, meeting the required canopy coverage target for the zone. The application was reviewed at the October 5th, 2021 advisory design panel meeting, and the panel noted that the proposed updates improve functionality and life of the building, do not negatively impact the setbacks, and do not increase the existing nonconformity, and further commended the design details on the accessory building that referenced the modest mid-century design of the home. The panel ultimately recommended that council consider the approval of both the upland siting design and development variance permit applications as presented. As the subject property is within an area designated as the uplands within the district's official community plan, staff further reviewed the proposal for conformance with the upland siting design guidelines. Staff determined that the proposal is not anticipated to significantly impact, it has significant impacts to views and shadowing or create overlook and privacy issues from neighboring properties. Furthermore, the proposed alterations to the siting design of the existing residence is to remain largely unchanged and is not anticipated to have significant impact on the character of the neighborhood or the maintenance of its established park-like setting. Therefore, staff consider the proposed development to be supportable. Should council wish to move forward with authorizing the development variance permit portion of this application, notification to adjacent property owners would be undertaken with the land use procedures bylaw, and the application will return to council for final consideration at a later date. Staff are requesting council direction on this application, and I believe the applicant Todd Martin is here today to speak to the application if needed. And the homeowner, Michelle Maynard, may also be in attendance tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber, and I believe both are in fact in attendance here. I will turn to to council and see if there are any questions of the applicant or Mr. Weber on this application. I do not see anything in the way of questions.
So I'll make the recommendation that the report be received and that council direct that notice be given of council's consideration of DVP 000117.
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I think this is a really uniquely shaped lot, so I understand the need for the variances, and I'm okay with that. And thanks again for not ripping down this house.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Any other discussion on this application? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. Just a small item. I know, and I'm very appreciative for the tree planting required and the increase in canopy cover, which is there's essentially no canopy on the site right now, so that's great. I did note, however, that in the submission package there isn't. It refers to a landscape plan showing where the plantings would go, but it's not actually included with the package. So it's a minor thing, but it would be great to see sort of the planting locations and the proposed landscape layout for things like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We did provide a location of all the new plantings. I'm not sure where that went. Maybe Kevin could speak to that.
Yeah, I'll ask Mr. Weber. Maybe just if this goes forward for notification, we'll include that in the package when it comes back. I don't think it's germane necessarily to the discussion here tonight. I think the council seems to be pretty comfortable with the applications that has been put forward. Any other discussion from council? We have a motion live on the floor. I don't see any. I'll reiterate again the appreciation of Councillor Braithwaite of finding ways of updating and improving an existing house and making overall improvements to the community in the process without tearing it down. So thank you for that work undertaken. We'll ready to call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. So just for clarification, if anybody's watching or for the applicants, this will now go out for official notification. We will solicit input from neighbors, and this will come back with any of those that public input, and we'll have a meeting open to the public input to consider the final approval at that time, which I believe would be 2 or 3 weeks away typically. So thank you very much to the applicants, Mr. Martin and Ms. Maynard, for coming. And thank you for sitting through a very long meeting to get to this point. I know it's a long one, so thank you for that. Take care. Moving on to item number 10.1. This is the last item on the agenda. This is open for public input. This is a development variance permit that has been out for public notice and is coming back to us. And so I just want to make sure the public are aware at the beginning of this section. If you wish to speak to this item, you can hit *9 if you're calling in, or you can use the reactions tab at the bottom of the page to raise your hand through the app, the Zoom application itself. So with that, I'm going to welcome back Ms. McDougall. Not back, this is the first time I think you've spoken tonight, Ms. McDougall, to 875 Linkley's Avenue.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. You saved me for the end, so that's wonderful. So before you for final consideration is development variance permit application number 00114 to facilitate renovations to a single-family home located at 875 Linkley's. Sorry, my dog has just woke up from nap and he's making more noise in the background there. The requested variances are with regards to sections of the zoning bylaw, specifically to reduce the front lot line setback from 7.62 meters to 4.9 meters, and to increase the allowable front yard paved surface area from 25% to 30% coverage. My apologies there. The requested variances would facilitate renovations to the existing single-family home, including the construction of a new covered porch and reconfigured stairs and paved walkway. The proposed exterior renovations will help modernize the appearance of the 1946 home while preserving most of the existing structure. With regards to paved surface area specifically, the existing paved surface area in the front yard is covering 35.9% of the front yard, and therefore is non-conforming to the zoning bylaw. But the proposed redevelopment of the front yard will technically reduce the total paved surface area to 30% coverage, but would still require a variance to increase the allowable front yard paved surface area from 25 to 30% for the reconfigured paved pathway and stairs. Additional measures such as replacing a strip of the existing driveway with grass will help reduce the total paved surface area in the front yard. So there is currently one tree located in the front yard, and the construction of the porch is most likely unlikely to impact the root zone of this tree. However, the new roof of the porch and reconstructed sidewalk will likely impact the tree's long-term health. A memo from the district's arborist dated August 24th, 2021 indicates that staff support removal and replacement of the bylaw protected tree at the 2-to-1 ratio. The memo explains that with the additional of one large canopy tree and one small canopy tree, the applicant should be able to meet the 35% canopy cover target for the property. Updated landscape plans will be required at the time of building permit to ensure that the tree canopy area target will be met. At its October 12th, 2021 council meeting, council directed staff give notice of its intent to consider the development variance permit, DVP 00114. Notice was subsequently mailed to adjacent property owners within a 50-meter radius on October 13th, 2021, as per the Oak Bay Land Use Procedures Bylaw and the Local Government Act. No correspondence has been received by staff. Overall, staff considered the requested variance to be supportable and are now seeking council's direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDougall. Now this is open to the public, so I'll take questions from staff, but I'll also keep an eye on the screen here in case there's any of the members of the public that wish to address council on this item. We do have the designer for it with us as well, so we can direct questions to either staff or to the applicant. Not seeing any hands raised. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I supported this when it first came to council. I thought it was a nice revitalization of an existing home in the district, and I noticed there are no letters in opposition or comments so far in opposition to it. So I am happy to move that the report be received and that the development variance permit DVP 00114 be approved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. I'm going to split the questions. I'm going to take the motion to receive first and just give a few more seconds for public to make comment before we come to decision. So I'm going to call the question on the motion to receive first. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Before I call the question on the approval on this, I just want to make sure that I have given adequate time for the public to make comment. Again, I'm looking at my screen. I don't see any hands raised either through the app or through the phone system. But I'm just going to wait for a moment here to see if staff, is there anybody from the public who's indicated they wish to speak?
Thank you, Your Worship. There are no callers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We should have an abundance of caution here on these items just to make sure that we're giving the public opportunity to speak to the items as they see fit. Still not seeing any hands or public raised, so I'm at the second part of the question, which is for approval. I'm ready to call that question. This is to approve DVP 00114. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries.
Motion to adjourn.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you very much, everybody, for a late evening, but a productive one. So thank you.